The golden and silver flames within the young man's eyes flickered incessantly, but there was a noticeable glacial aura emanating from his body. All of a sudden, he made a hand seal, and a layer of golden spiritual flames erupted from his body, which then transformed into a lavish golden robe that covered his entire body. He then made a grabbing motion toward the crystal ball from afar, and it flew over to him before vanishing into his body in a flash. The young man raised his head before murmuring to himself, "I almost died for that treasure in the true immortal realm. How dare you take it away? I don't care who you are, I'm going to hunt you down to the ends of this realm and erase you from existence. But before that, I have to get out of this place." Judging from the contents of his words, he should have been extremely angry, but his face remained completely expressionless, which created a very peculiar contrast. In the next instant, he rubbed his hands together, and golden light flashed before he raised his palms up into the air. A ball of golden light emerged, and in the beginning, it was only around the size of a human fist, but it then swelled dramatically in size, while a buzzing sound erupted throughout the entire secret chamber. Within the span of just a few breaths, a few dull thumps rang out within this mysterious palace, following which several golden pillars of light erupted in all directions from it. A string of loud rumbling booms then erupted as more golden light surged out of the palace in a frenzy, and the entire building completely collapsed and crumbled. The entire area was inundated by this golden light, and when the light faded, the golden-robed young man was revealed again, standing on the original site of the palace in an expressionless manner. He withdrew his raised arms, and moments later, a streak of golden light flew out of the ocean. After that, the streak of golden light chose a certain direction to travel toward, and it was heading directly for the Tian Yuan continent. On the territory of the Tian Yuan continent's Wood tribe, there was a barefoot woman in a white dress hovering gracefully over an enormous lush tree that was over 100,000 feet tall. Standing before her was an azure-robed elderly man, and they were engaged in a tense standoff. Over 1,000 feet below the woman, there was a hideous burly man in a suit of black armor, surrounded by a middle-aged man and woman. The burly man had his arms crossed, and he was glowering at the middle-aged duo with a ferocious look in his eyes. In contrast, the middle-aged pair were both quite refined in appearance, and the woman was appraising the burly man with a wary look in her eyes. "I don't know who you are or where you came from, but you infiltrated the holy land of our Wood tribe and picked over 10 of our black spirit flowers. Do you really think our tribe doesn't have any grand ascension stage beings to oppose you?" The azure-robed man said in a cold voice as he glowered at the woman before him. "I wouldn't infiltrate a place without doing sufficient research beforehand. You're a grand elder of the Wood tribe, right? Don't be so stingy, fellow Taoist Wu. There's no need to get so worked up over a few black spirit flowers," the woman said in an unflustered manner, seemingly completely unfazed by the powerful foe standing before her. "HMPH, you make it sound like no big deal, but black spirit flowers possess extraordinary effects, and our entire tribe can only produce just over 100 such flowers per 10,000 years. You've taken close to half of them at once, and you think you'll simply be allowed to go free." The elderly man's expression darkened as he spoke. This grand elder of the Wood tribe had been cultivating within a certain secret area nearby, and if it weren't for the fact that he had to come out of seclusion to attend to some matters, he wouldn't even have noticed that someone had infiltrated their tribe's holy land before taking so many black spirit flowers. As soon as he discovered this, he immediately confronted the perpetrators, but the woman standing before him possessed unfathomable powers, even to a grand ascension stage being like him, which was why he hadn't attacked her right away. "I've already done your tribe a favor by not taking all of your black spirit flowers. You're quite powerful, but you're still no match for me, so what are you going to do?" The woman scoffed, and the azure-robed elderly man was greatly enraged by her words. At the height of his fury, the elderly man burst into incredulous laughter. "Ha! Seeing as you have no respect or regard for our Wood tribe, I'll have to test out your abilities to see if you can truly back up your words. If you really are more powerful than me, then I'll command the entire Wood tribe to stand down and allow you to leave. If you're no match for me, then other beings of your Wood tribe would simply be asking for death if they were to challenge me. However, do you really want to fight here?" the woman asked with a smile as she glanced at the giant tree down below. The woman was already a peerless beauty, and her smile only further accentuated her allure. Even the elderly man couldn't help but be momentarily entranced by her stunning elegance, but he immediately returned to his senses, upon which his expression darkened even further. The two of us would raise my tribe's holy land to the ground if we were to battle here. Come with me, fellow Taoist. As soon as his voice trailed off, the elderly man abruptly swept a sleeve upward, and a pillar of azure light erupted forth. The pillar of azure light then transformed into a gargantuan sword that was over 1,000 feet in length before slashing through the air. A resounding boom rang out as the giant sword struck the empty air amid a flash of white light. A burst of powerful spatial fluctuations erupted forth, and a spatial rift that was over 100 feet in length appeared. This grand elder of the Wood tribe had smashed open a spatial rift with just a single attack. He stepped into the spatial rift without any hesitation, completely disregarding the hazards within the rift. A faint smile that was tinged with a hint of derision and disdain appeared on the woman's face, and she turned to the burly man down below before issuing an instruction. "You stay here for now. I'll be back soon." Yes, sacred ancestor. The burly man was very ferocious in appearance, but he was acting extremely respectfully toward the woman. The woman gently tapped a foot into the air, and a pink flower emerged beneath her feet before slowly carrying her into the spatial rift as well. Moments later, a string of rumbling booms and astonishing explosions erupted within the spatial rift, accompanied by flashes of dazzling light. It was as if doomsday had befallen the space within the rift. The two middle-aged Wood tribe cultivators both exchanged a shocked glance upon seeing this. As for the burly man, he turned back to the middle-aged duo as the vicious look reappeared on his face, seemingly completely unconcerned about the woman in white. The commotion taking place within the rift didn't last too long. Around 10 minutes later, all of the light faded, and nothing more than complete silence could be heard within the spatial rift. The middle-aged duo turned toward the rift with nervous looks on their faces, while the burly man merely appraised them with a cold sneer on his face. Moments later, azure light flashed from within the spatial rift, and a humanoid figure emerged from within. It was none other than the azure-robed elderly man. He appeared to be completely physically unscathed, but his face was clearly paler than before. As soon as he emerged from the spatial rift, he turned back toward it with a hint of fear in his eyes. Only then did the woman in white also exit the spatial rift, and her expression was just as calm and collected as when she had first strode into the rift. The concern on the faces of the middle-aged duo from the Wood tribe was only exacerbated upon seeing this. As soon as the woman in white emerged, she asked, "Can I leave now, fellow Taoist?" The Wood tribe grand elder wore an extremely strained expression as instructed through gritted teeth. "Mu Jun, Mu Jiao, issue this order of mine. No one from the Wood tribe is permitted to attack these two, and they are to be allowed to leave our territory as they please." The middle-aged man immediately tried to dispute the order. "But Grand Elder, those black spirit flowers are—" "Shut up, are you doubting my words?" the elderly man yelled as a cold look appeared on his face. "I wouldn't dare, senior. I'll pass on your orders right away," the middle-aged man hurriedly replied with a respectful bow. "HMPH, go on then," the elderly man harumphed coldly. On this occasion, the middle-aged man didn't dare to hesitate. He flipped a hand over to produce a stack of shimmering azure talismans, and he swept a hand toward the talismans a few times before releasing them as streaks of azure light with a flick of his wrist. The talismans immediately vanished into thin air nearby, and the woman in the white dress merely smiled upon seeing this as she tucked a few strands of stray hair behind her ear. She then waved a hand toward the black-armored burly man down below, then flew away without uttering a single word. The burly man cackled triumphantly before immediately setting off in pursuit of the woman, as a gust of fierce black wind. The Wood tribe grand elder was extremely enraged that the body integration stage burly man was acting so rudely in his presence, but he didn't dare to do anything aside from look on with a frosty expression as the duo flew away. "Mu Jiao, your azure spirit wisdom eyes are extremely profound. Could you identify anything about those two?" the elderly man suddenly asked. "I'm afraid I'll have to let you down, Grand Elder. I activated my wisdom eyes to their very maximal extent just then, but was still unable to see much. That Grand Ascension stage woman is enshrouded within countless flower projections, making it impossible for me to see her true form. Could it be that she's also a wood spirit or has some kind of connection to our Wood tribe?" The middle-aged Wood tribe woman replied in a hesitant manner. "HMPH, she's definitely not from our Wood tribe. It's most likely the case that the cultivation art she's using is somehow connected to ours. She's unfathomably powerful, and I can't help but worry now that she's appeared near our wood tribe territory so close to the commencement of the devilish tribulation," the elderly man sighed. "I trust your judgment, Grand Elder. As for that man, I saw an indistinct worm projection on his body, and I could also see that he possesses extremely pure devilish chi. Could he be somehow related to the elder devil race?" the woman speculated. "Most likely not. There are countless devil Dao cultivation arts littered throughout the spirit realm, and the fact that his true form is a worm indicates that he's definitely not from the elder devil race. The worms and the elder devils are sworn enemies, and if two such beings were to encounter one another, a battle to the death would immediately ensue," the elderly man concluded after a brief pause for thought. Despite his vast wealth of knowledge and experience, it didn't occur to this wood tribe grand elder that the black-armored man could be an evil dragon that had been extinct for countless years in the spirit realm. As a result, he naturally made a massive lapse in judgment. Meanwhile, high up in the air thousands of kilometers away, the burly man was speaking to the woman in white in a respectful manner. "Sacred ancestor, if these black spirit flowers are useful to you, then why didn't you take all of them? That wood tribe grand elder is only an early grand ascension stage being, so there's no way he could have posed a threat to you. After all, even among all of the sacred ancestors of our holy realm, your powers rank among the top 5. I'm confident in my ability to defeat that wood tribe grand elder, but I'm not actually confident in my ability to kill him. On top of that, black spirit flowers only have a limited effect in helping me recover from my injuries, so they'll cease to be effective for me once I consume more than 10. As such, there's a mismatch between risk and reward, so why would I do something so unwise?" the woman explained. "I see. However, we've scoured most of the Tian Yuan continent already. If we can't find anything soon, then isn't it time we left this continent? If I recall correctly, the Holy Realm should be about to descend upon this realm, and it would be very bad for us if we were to encounter other sacred ancestors," the man said in a hesitant manner. "Prior to escaping from the Holy Realm, I did indeed discuss some details about this with the other sacred ancestors, and this is indeed one of the regions where our two realms overlap the most. However, there's no need to be concerned. Even though the Holy Realm is about to descend, those sacred ancestors won't be able to arrive in the spirit realm right away. At the very most, we'll only have to deal with their clones. On top of that, I couldn't be certain prior to this, but I used a divination secret technique after reaching this place, and the technique tells me that there's a very good chance that the thing I'm looking for is here. As such, I certainly can't just leave under these circumstances," the woman chuckled. "I see. In that case, I'll do everything in my power to find that thing and help you recover your powers, even if it means giving up my life," the burly man said with a confident slap of his own chest. "Looks like Ming Luo disciplined you very well. If you can help me recover my powers, then I'll naturally reward you handsomely as well," the woman said with a faint, mysterious smile. "Thank you, sacred ancestor. I am yours to do with as you see fit." The burly man was ecstatic to hear this, and he immediately scrambled to express his loyalty again. The woman merely glanced at the burly man with a hint of a smile and didn't say anything further. Thus, the two of them continued onward, and they were heading directly toward the territory of the human race. Han Li was on the peak of a certain mountain, appraising the gigantic devilish mark in the sky with a dark expression. Several tens of feet behind him, his 3 disciples were standing in a respectful manner with their hands by their sides. Han Li heaved a faint sigh before instructing, "Let's go back now. It looks like the devilish tribulation is definitely going to commence within half a year." "Yes, master." The 3 disciples naturally had no objections. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of azure light that swept up all 4 of them, then flew directly toward the cave abode. An hour later, Han Li was seated in the hall of his cave abode with a silver-robed beauty sitting beside him. This was none other than the ice phoenix who had been cultivating under his protection this entire time. At this point, not only had she recovered all of her former magic power, she had already reached the late deity transformation stage, and a major contributing factor behind her fast progress was the pills that Han Li had been constantly providing her with. Bai Gyur, Hai Yueshan, and Qi Lingzi were also standing in the secret chamber. "Brother Han, the devilish mark has appeared far too close to our cave abode for comfort. This clearly isn't a suitable place to cultivate it anymore. What are your plans from here? Should we move our cave abode elsewhere right away?" the ice phoenix asked with a hint of concern in her eyes. These past few centuries had been the most enjoyable period of time in her cultivation journey. Not only did she not have to worry about her own safety, she had a virtually limitless supply of exceptional pills, yet all of this could come to an end now with the impending devilish tribulation looming over their heads. We will indeed have to move the cave abode. Let's move to Deep Heaven City. After all, once the devilish tribulation commences, almost all sparsely populated areas will be extremely dangerous. Even if we don't go to Deep Heaven City, we'll still have to go to one of the sovereign cities, Han Li replied. We're moving to Deep Heaven City. Does that mean you plan to join their panel of elders, Brother Han? The Ice Phoenix asked in a surprised manner. No, only the four of you will be residing in Deep Heaven City in the long term. I'll help defend Deep Heaven City against the first few waves of attacks from the Elder Devil realm, then go to cultivate in a secret place that the Elder Devils won't be able to find. Han Li replied with a shake of his head. Why is that, could it be? A thought immediately occurred to the Ice Phoenix. Han Li nodded in confirmation. That's right, I'll be able to attempt a breakthrough to the late body integration stage in about 10 more years, so I need to go into seclusion for some time. I see. That is indeed a wise decision, Brother Han. As for your breakthrough to the late body integration stage, I promise to assist you during the process, so when the time comes, I'll do as you say, Brother Han, the Ice Phoenix said as a faint blush appeared on her face. Han Li nodded before turning to his three disciples. Clean up the cave abode and tell all of your disciples that we're leaving this place in 3 days. Yor, seeing as you're unwilling to go to Deep Heaven City, you can go to Xuanwu City after taking care of all of the disciples. Xuanwu City will be guarded by Xuanwu Tyrant Sovereign and that old tortoise, so it'll be a very safe place. Yes, Master. Thank you, Master. The three disciples naturally didn't have objections, and they all extended respectful bows toward Han Li. Thus, 3 days later, several giant arcs that were over 300 feet in length emerged from a mountain. Standing at the very front of one of the arcs was an azure-robed young man with an extremely calm and collected look on his face, looking as if nothing in this world could impact his emotions. On the other arc stood several hundreds of people of both genders and all age ranges, some of whom wore nervous looks on their faces, but most of them were very excited. Moments later, bright spiritual light flashed from the surfaces of the giant arcs, and they quickly vanished into the distance as massive balls of light. Almost at the exact same time, there were tens of thousands of mortals and cultivators who were also boarding a series of giant flying arcs on a small mountain range countless kilometers away. The entire scene was extremely bustling and chaotic, and on one of the arcs stood a woman in a palatial dress, surrounded by a dozen or so deity transformation and spatial tempering cultivators. The woman was an exquisite beauty who appeared to be in her 20s, and her brows were slightly furrowed as she appraised the chaotic scenes unfolding before her. Senior Blood Spirit, I think it would be a safer option to travel to Xuanwu City. After all, aside from Xuanwu Tyrant Sovereign, there's also a giant beast in Xuanwu City that's close to a true spirit in power. A spatial tempering stage elderly man said in a hesitant manner. Are you doubting my judgment? The woman asked in a cold voice. No, I wouldn't dare, the elderly man hurriedly said. HMPH, you don't know anything. With the Tyrant Sovereign and that old tortoise, Xuanwu City will naturally be more powerful than Tianyuan City, but I have some ties with the current Heavenly Yuan Holy Sovereign, so at the very least, our Su family won't be used as cannon fodder when we reach Tianyuan City. In contrast, I certainly can't guarantee the same in Xuanwu City, the woman said in a confident manner. I see, forgive me for my ignorance, the elderly man said with a respectful salute. I'll let you off the hook this one time seeing as you're thinking for the sake of the Su family, but don't blame me for turning on you if you do that again, the woman said with a cold look in her eyes. Everyone around her hurriedly bowed in unison upon hearing this, and proclaimed that they wouldn't dare to question her authority again. The woman merely waved a hand before turning away. Over half a day later, around 100 arcs of different sizes rose up into the air before flying toward a certain direction, and the mountain range was completely deserted in the blink of an eye. The enormous estate of the Su family had been abandoned in its entirety, just like that. The same thing was happening all throughout the human race. Some of the prominent families who hadn't yet joined any major powers finally lost their cool after the devilish marks appeared, and they all abandoned their estates to seek out greener pastures. 2 months later, a golden-robed old monk was standing atop the giant city wall of Deep Heaven City, looking into the distance through a pair of narrowed eyes. Behind the monk were a dozen or so high-grade cultivators in different attire, and they were also looking into the distance with curiosity in their eyes. Not long after that, spiritual light flashed in the distant sky, and one flying arc after another emerged before heading directly toward the city wall. A stir immediately ran through the cultivators standing behind the monk, and the situation became slightly chaotic. The monk didn't turn around, but he could sense everyone's reactions, and he immediately cleared his throat with furrowed brows. He didn't do so very loudly, but all of the chatter immediately died down, and at this moment, several more arcs appeared in the distance amid flashes of spiritual light. A faint smile appeared on the monk's face at the sight of the arcs, and he immediately called out into the distance, "Is that you, fellow Taoist Han? I've been expecting you." His voice wasn't very loud, but it was as audible as rumbling thunder to the giant arcs in the distance. "I'm truly flattered that you've come out to greet me in person, fellow Taoist Jin Yue. I assume you've received the letter I sent out a few days ago," an azure figure on one of the arcs replied from afar. He was naturally none other than someone who wasn't Han Li, and his voice was also clearly audible to those on the city wall. "JK, it's still Han Li. Haha, your assistance will greatly benefit our deep heaven city, so it would only be right of me to come out and greet you in person," Buddhist monk Jin Yue chuckled. Han Li merely smiled and remained silent upon hearing this. The giant arcs reached the city wall after just a few flashes, following which Han Li descended in a nonchalant manner. "You look well, fellow Taoist Jin Yue," Han Li said as he cupped his fist in a salute toward the old monk. After ascertaining Han Li's cultivation base with his spiritual sense, a hint of shock flashed through Buddhist monk Jin Yue's eyes, and a wry smile appeared on his face. "I'm just an old man, fellow Taoist Han. I can see that you've made another breakthrough to the mid-body integration stage in just a few centuries. You truly put old geezers like us to shame. Back when I was at your age, I had only just made it to the spatial tempering stage." "Haha, there's no need to be so self-deprecating, fellow Taoist. If I'm not mistaken, I can sense that you've mastered some kind of powerful ability since we last met," Han Li said with a hint of a smile. "I did indeed recently successfully cultivate a certain ability, but that's nothing compared to the astonishing progress you've made, fellow Taoist Han. Please follow me to the Elder Hall and we'll continue our conversation there, brother Han. I'll make sure your disciples are taken care of," the old monk said in a modest manner before making an inviting hand gesture toward Han Li. "Please lead the way, fellow Taoist," Han Li replied with a nod. Thus, Buddhist monk Jin Yue instructed two of the cultivators behind him to lead the flying arcs into the city, then led Han Li toward somewhere else in the city. 2 hours later, Han Li and Buddhist monk Jin Yue arrived within a certain hall in a huge tower. The tables, chairs, and walls in the hall were all of a pristine white color, looking as if they had been paved with beautiful white jade. Aside from Han Li and Buddhist monk Jin Yue, there were also 3 other body integration cultivators in the hall. One of them was a silver-haired elderly man with a set of remarkably youthful facial features. Another was a burly man in a black leather robe, and the final one was a woman with shoulder-length hair wearing a silver mask. Among the 3 of them, the white-robed elderly man clearly possessed the highest cultivation base. He was at the pinnacle of the mid-body integration stage, and was only a step away from becoming a late-body integration cultivator. As for the burly man and the masked woman, they were both at the early body integration stage, but their auras were quite peculiar, so they were clearly each using some strange cultivation arts. Han Li was sitting in his chair, listening to everyone's conversations, but he was constantly appraising the masked woman with a peculiar look on his face. The white-robed elderly man quickly caught on to this, and he smiled as he asked, "Have you met Fairy Silver Light before, brother Han?" The masked woman had also been growing rather uncomfortable from Han Li's unexplained scrutiny, and she asked, "I've also been wanting to ask this. Would you be able to enlighten me, brother Han? This is the first time that we've met, but your aura is very similar to a past acquaintance of mine. May I ask which branch of the demon race you're from, fellow Taoist?" Han Li asked with a contemplative look in his eyes. "A similar aura. Your acquaintance must also be a silver wolf being then. Fellow Taoist Silver Light is one of the silver wolf race's 2 body integration cultivators," the black-robed man explained. Fairy Silver Light's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and she asked in a curious manner, "I am indeed a member of the silver wolf race. What is the name of your acquaintance, fellow Taoist Han? Perhaps I'll know of them." Han Li's expression changed slightly, and he really did decide to ask about Silvermoon. In that case, I really do plan to ask you about her. Would you happen to know if a fellow Taoist by the name of Ling Long is doing well at the moment? At his current cultivation base, he naturally didn't have to fear wolf monarch Tian Kui, so he was able to ask this question without any inhibitions. He had been keeping an eye out for information about Silvermoon after reaching the body integration stage, but the territory of the Silver Wolf race was a very secretive place, and they very rarely came into contact with outsiders. Hence, everyone that Han Li asked either knew nothing, or could only provide tiny morsels of information that were nowhere near enough for him to learn about Silvermoon's current situation. Now that he had encountered a body integration stage Silver Wolf being, Han Li naturally wasn't going to pass up this opportunity. Ling Long, your acquaintance is Sister Ling Long. Come to think of it, I've heard that you're an ascended cultivator. Could it be that you're? Fairy Silver Light's voice cut off mid-sentence as if she had suddenly thought of something taboo, and a very peculiar look had appeared in her eyes as she appraised Han Li. Han Li was quite elated to hear this, but his expression remained calm as he said, "So you really do know Fairy Ling Long?" "I grew up with Sister Ling Long, so of course I know her. I do have some information about Ling Long, but I can't disclose too much to you. All I can tell you is that Ling Long is alive and well, and she's already reached the late spatial tempering stage," Fairy Silver Light sighed. A cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and after a brief moment of contemplation, his lips tremored as he transmitted his voice to Fairy Silver Light. "What's there that can't be disclosed? I understand that this is not an appropriate place to speak about such matters. I'll pay you a separate visit in a couple of days, and we can discuss Ling Long in greater detail." A hesitant look flashed through Fairy Silver Light's eyes upon hearing this, but she still nodded in the end. Everyone else was rather intrigued by Han Li and Fairy Silver Light's exchange, but none of them pried into the matter. Instead, they changed the subject and began to discuss matters related to the imminent devilish tribulation, as well as how grateful they were that Han Li was willing to offer them his assistance. Prior to coming here, Han Li had used a myriad distance talisman to inform the elders that he could only help defend Deep Heaven City against the devilish tribulation for the first few years, and that he was doing so in exchange for refuge for his disciples. The most ferocious attacks from the elder devil race always came during the first few waves, so the elders were naturally more than happy to agree to this arrangement. Thus, after a pleasant discussion during which everyone exchanged some ideas for dealing with the upcoming devilish tribulation, Han Li finally took his leave. Fairy Silver Light looked on, as Han Li departed with an indecisive look on her masked face. 2 days later, Han Li arrived at Fairy Silver Light's cave abode on his own, and only after half a day had passed did he re-emerge with a dark expression on his face. He paused at the entrance and looked up at the clear blue sky for a long time before letting loose a cold chuckle, then flew away as a streak of azure light. Han Li was living in a separate white pagoda in Deep Heaven City. This pagoda was less than 10 times the size of the other giant buildings in the cities, but it was still large enough for Han Li and his entourage to live in. Han Li was currently residing on the top level of this pagoda, but that didn't mean that he intended to live here for a long period of time. After around half a month, Han Li summoned his 3 disciples, and after issuing them some instructions, he departed from the pagoda as a streak of azure light. Prior to the commencement of the devilish tribulation, there was still something that he had to do. He traveled without pause and arrived directly at the place where all of the teleportation formations were situated in Deep Heaven City. After issuing some instructions to the guards there, he was teleported to a certain massive city that was countless kilometers away. Han Li completely disregarded the awestruck eyes of the cultivators guarding the teleportation formations there, and departed from the city, flying away toward a certain direction. Around 2 months later, Han Li appeared within a mountain range that was abundant with baleful qi. This mountain range stretched for millions of kilometers, and within it, a dozen or so cities of different sizes could be seen. These cities were linked by all types of fortresses to form a giant ring, and beyond the fortresses were series of formations that littered the entire mountain range, transforming the place into an enormous stronghold. There were also groups of azure-armored guards consisting of around 10 to 100 people per group patrolling the area. But with Han Li's astonishing cultivation base, he naturally didn't encounter any resistance as he flew into the deepest part of the mountain range, before stopping in front of the largest of the dozen or so cities. He hovered at a low altitude and looked on at a huge flag, upon which was a massive, long character. Han Li had learned some things about this city back when he was in Deep Heaven City, and he knew that this was a stronghold that the Long family had constructed alongside a dozen or so other major families to ward off the Elder Devil race together. These families were all of different sizes, and some of them weren't even true spirit families, but they were all quite powerful. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been confident enough to set up their own independent stronghold in the face of the imminent devilish tribulation. Of course, their greatest source of confidence came from the Long family patriarch, who was renowned as one of the most powerful beings of the human race. Han Li wondered what these people would think if they knew that this powerful backer of theirs was going to leave this place not long after the commencement of the devilish tribulation. After entertaining this ironic thought for a moment, Han Li suddenly flipped a hand over to produce a yellow talisman, then swiped it through the air, and it shot forth as a streak of golden light before vanishing in a flash. He then flew over to a nearby hill before taking a seat on a huge rock and closing his eyes in a calm manner. Immortal Galaxy Tree. Has anyone else noticed that the author reused the name Jin Yue? Between Shi Kun and Jin Yue, the author doesn't seem have enough names in his bag lol. After a while, Han Li's expression changed slightly, and he reopened his eyes. A ball of golden light was flying out of the giant city that belonged to the Long family, and it quickly arrived in the air close to Han Li. Within the golden ball of light was a middle-aged man. It was none other than the Long family patriarch. He was appraising Han Li in an expressionless manner from above, and Han Li calmly rose to his feet before cupping his fist in a salute. "Greetings, Brother Long. I heard that you had progressed to the mid-body integration stage, and I had thought that was just a rumor. However, it seems that you really made another breakthrough, fellow Taoist Han. Your rate of progression may not be unmatched by anyone of the past or the future, but there's certainly no one in the entire human race who can currently compare with you," the Long family patriarch said in a slightly awestruck manner. "You're far too kind, Brother Long. I'm sure you haven't come out to see me just to discuss my cultivation progression, right?" Han Li said in an indifferent manner. The Long family patriarch's lips twitched slightly as he replied, "Of course not, but I think the purpose for your visit is already quite apparent. You've progressed to the mid-body integration stage, so you've clearly already decided to come with us on our journey to the Elder Devil race. Indeed, I've decided to join you on this journey, but that's not the main purpose for my visit. I would like to propose an exchange with you, Brother Long," Han Li said as he crossed his arms in a calm manner. The Long family patriarch faltered slightly upon hearing this before a curious look appeared in his eyes. "Oh, what's the exchange?" "I heard that your Long family is able to refine a type of pill known as the Dragon Spirit Pill using Dragon True Spirit blood as the main ingredient, and that this pill is rather useful for breaking through body integration stage bottlenecks. Also, I've heard that your family seems to have replicated the legendary giant Atlas Ark," Han Li replied without giving a direct response. "That is indeed the case. Are you interested in those two items, fellow Taoist? That's a pity for you then, because there's no way I would offer those two items for exchange," the Long family patriarch chuckled coldly. "Letter 1D68F, letter 1D42B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D568, letter 1D41E, letter 1D554, letter 1D428, letter 1D5FA. Why speak in such absolute terms, Brother Long? There is nothing in this world that can't be exchanged. It's all about whether I can offer you something that'll be sufficiently tempting to you," Han Li chuckled in a confident manner. The Long family patriarch's heart stirred slightly upon hearing this, but his expression remained unchanged. "Oh, you sound very confident, fellow Taoist." Han Li smiled and continued, "I heard that you've been held back by a late body integration stage bottleneck for tens of thousands of years already. Would you be interested in something that can help you break through that bottleneck?" The Long family patriarch was stunned to hear this, but he quickly regained his composure and said, "I would indeed be interested in something like that, but that'll depend on what it is. If the effects are very minimal, then it won't be very useful to me." "Why don't you take a look at this, fellow Taoist Long?" Han Li smiled as he swept a sleeve through the air, sending a thumb-sized jade vial flying directly toward the Long family patriarch. The Long family patriarch's eyes narrowed slightly as he drew the small vial into his grasp, and his expression changed slightly as soon as he injected his spiritual sense into the vial. An incredulous look appeared in his eyes, and he hurriedly removed the lid on the vial before bringing its opening to his nose to inhale the scent of its contents. "Is this Celestial River Silver Elixir?" "No, not quite. It seems to be something even more potent. It's rather similar to High Zenith Immortal Elixir, but the color is a little different. The Long family patriarch's wooden expression had completely been replaced by elation at this point. How is it? I'm sure this divine infernal river elixir will be of assistance to you, right, fellow Taoist? Han Li wasn't surprised at all to see this. The Long family patriarch's expression quickly returned to normal, and he said in a contemplative manner, "So this elixir is known as divine infernal river elixir. I've never heard of it. This elixir will indeed be able to assist me in breaking through my bottleneck, but surely you have more than just a few drops, right? Otherwise, it will still be of no use to me." Han Li smiled as he flipped a hand over to produce a small white vial, then replied, "Of course, I have an entire vial of this elixir, but I want to exchange it for a vial of dragon spirit pills and a giant atlas arc." "You're asking for far too much, fellow Taoist. Our Long family's dragon spirit pills are indeed somewhat inferior to this elixir, but it definitely won't be by much. On top of that, you're asking for a giant atlas arc as well. Don't you think that's a bit too unfair?" A cold light flashed through the Long family patriarch's eyes as he spoke. "I'm aware of this, but there's an important difference between this elixir and dragon spirit pills. This vial of divine infernal river elixir is the only one in the entire human race. I've already consumed the rest of the elixir, and that's how I was able to make another breakthrough so quickly. In fact, it's hard to say whether a second vial of this elixir exists even on the entire Tian Yuan continent. In contrast, your Long family can continue to refine dragon spirit pills indefinitely. If you miss out on this vial of elixir, I can assure you that you won't see another vial of this elixir during your lifetime. As for those dragon spirit pills, your Long family proclaims that it's not for sale, but some of those pills have found their way out of your Long family through one avenue or another. If I spend some time to search for them, there's a good chance that I'll be able to track some down," Han Li said with a faint smile. "HMPH, your spiel may work on others, but it's not going to work on me. No matter what you say, there's no way I'll agree to this exchange." The Long family patriarch harumphed coldly without displaying any willingness to back down. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, but his expression then quickly reverted back to normal. "In that case, just pretend I never offered this exchange in the first place. You can keep those drops of elixir as a gift from me." Han Li cupped his fist in a salute as he spoke, and spiritual light flashed from his body as he turned to leave. The Long family patriarch's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and immediately called out, "Hold on. Have you changed your mind, Brother Long?" Han Li turned around with a hint of a smile on his face. "HMPH, there's no need for beings like you and I to play these immature games. Your divine infernal river elixir is indeed extremely useful to me, but the exchange you've proposed is too unreasonable. If you want to exchange this elixir for my dragon spirit pills and a giant atlas arc, you have to hand over another item or a huge sum of spirit stones as well. That second item can be of a slightly lower value than the giant atlas arc," the Long family patriarch said in a cold voice. "All right, I can consider this condition. How about this? Aside from the divine infernal river elixir, I'll throw in a batch of materials worth over 100 million spirit stones for a giant atlas arc. What do you think?" Han Li proposed as he stroked his chin. "Materials worth 100 million spirit stones. What kind of materials are these?" the Long family patriarch asked as his lips twitched slightly. "I have a list here for you to inspect, Brother Long," Han Li said in a confident manner, then swept a sleeve through the air to send a jade slip flying through the air as a white ball of light. "You sure came prepared, fellow Taoist Han." The Long family patriarch could only sigh in a resigned manner before drawing the jade slip into his grasp. After only briefly inspecting the contents of the jade slip with his spiritual sense, a stunned look appeared on the Long family patriarch's face. "What do you think of those materials, Brother Long? Those are all items that your Long family require, right?" Han Li asked in a meaningful voice. The Long family patriarch was silent for a long while before he finally said, with a peculiar look on his face, "To think that you were able to source these items that several major powers desperately need. It looks like you've had your sights set on our Long family's giant atlas arc for a long time. Otherwise, there's no way you would have gathered all these materials in a short time. These items can't even be purchased with spirit stones at this point in time. Very well, it seems that this is not an unfair exchange, so I'll accept it. You've definitely made a wise decision, Brother Long. This is a mutually beneficial exchange." An elated smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he brought his hands together in front of his own chest before separating them to reveal an azure bracelet and the white jade vial again. However, he didn't immediately toss the items over to the Long family patriarch. Instead, he merely looked up at him in an expectant manner. The Long family patriarch was naturally aware of his intentions, and he immediately swept a sleeve through the air to summon two balls of spiritual light, one golden and one black. These were none other than a golden vial and a glossy black miniature ark. There wasn't anything remarkable about the golden vial aside from a few leaf-like patterns engraved onto its surface, but the miniature ark, which was only several inches in length, was intricate beyond belief. Not only was the surface of the ark as black as ink, the ark was a three-mast barquentine with a cabin that had as many as 5 levels. Furthermore, there were countless colorful formations engraved onto the surface of the ark that were far too miniature to be visible to the naked eye, but they were clearly extremely profound. The Long family patriarch flicked his wrist, and the two items were tossed toward Han Li. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up, and he also tossed his jade vial and storage bracelet upward without any hesitation, then drew the two items descending toward him into his grasp. He removed the lid of the golden vial and slowly swept his spiritual sense over each and every crimson pill within the vial, upon which a pleased look appeared on his face. With this vial of pills that were vastly renowned in the entire human race, he had increased his chances of making a breakthrough to the late body integration stage by 5%. He then turned his gaze toward the miniature black ark. So this is the giant Atlas ark, eh? It does indeed look quite extraordinary, but I'll have to examine its powers. Thus, Han Li tossed the miniature ark into the air before pointing a finger toward it. A resounding rumbling sound rang out, and black light flashed as the miniature ark swelled to countless times its original size. Initially, it was only around several hundred feet in size, but in the blink of an eye, it had become as massive as a mountain. Its 3 black masts were like a trio of heavenly pillars that extended for over 100,000 feet up into the air, and several extremely lifelike ferocious black beasts had been inscribed onto the black sails, giving off an extremely menacing appearance. What was even more astonishing was that, after expanding the ark to its full size, different items had surfaced from the centers of the formations on the giant ark. Some of these items were balls, some of them were cylinders, but no matter what shape the items were in, all of them had extremely complex runes engraved on their surfaces. It was quite clear that these items had been designed to be easy to activate, but were still capable of unleashing enormous power. However, with this many of them, it would most likely require hundreds of cultivators to activate all of them at once. The most eye-catching things on the ark were the 3 semi-transparent 5-colored pillars protruding from the top of the cabin. Not only were these 3 pillars as thick as water tanks, they were over 1,000 feet in length, and none of the other aforementioned items could compare with them. Just as Han Li was carefully inspecting the giant ark, the Long family patriarch had already completed his examination of the elixir and storage bracelet. He stowed the 2 items away, then cast his gaze toward the massive ark as he said, "It cost over 100 million spirit stones and materials alone to construct this giant Atlas ark, and that's completely discounting the enormous amount of labor, time, and effort that went into its construction process. If I were to sell this ark, I normally wouldn't consider any offer less than twice the value of the materials that you offered to me. I know that I stand to benefit slightly more from this exchange than you do, but at the same time, that elixir and those materials definitely can't be purchased with spirit stones in the outside world. In any case, our exchange is complete, so there's no reason for me to stay here any longer. Send me a message in advance when you decide to enter the Elder Devil realm, and I'll be sure to arrive on time." Han Li chuckled as he made a hand seal, and the giant ark shrank down to several inches in size again before flying up his sleeve. As long as the human race can withstand the first few waves of attacks from the Elder Devil race and limit the magnitude of the devilish tribulation to a manageable scope, then we'll definitely go ahead with our trip, and I'll be sure to notify you in advance. With your current cultivation base, I'm sure you'll be of great assistance to us," the Long family patriarch said as a rare smile appeared on his wooden face. Han Li nodded in response before suddenly turning to what appeared to be a patch of empty air with a peculiar smile on his face. He then cupped his fist in a salute toward that direction before flying away as a streak of azure light. The Long family patriarch's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and only after the streak of azure light had completely vanished into the distance did he heave a faint sigh. Right at this moment, spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted from the spot that Han Li had been looking at before, and a black-robed man emerged out of thin air. It was none other than the Long family's other Grand Elder. He wore a dark expression as he also cast his gaze toward the direction that Han Li had departed in, and said in a grim voice, "It seems that he sensed my presence very early on. This new concealment ability that I've cultivated makes it very difficult even for you to sense my presence, yet it was unable to fool him. He's either cultivated some kind of powerful special ability or possesses a powerful treasure that specializes in countering concealment techniques. Indeed, however, there's also a possibility that his spiritual sense is more powerful than ours. With his astonishing rate of progression, it makes sense that he has a few incredible abilities up his sleeve. In any case, he'll be a valuable addition to our party when we venture into the Elder Devil realm. I'm sure he'll be no less powerful than the body integration stage beings of the spirit race." The Long family patriarch replied with an expressionless nod. "I've done some research on this Han brat, and he could potentially be a volatile element in our party," the black-robed man said with furrowed brows. "HMPH, so what? How much do you know about the other people we've invited? It doesn't matter as long as they can help us accomplish our objective. This devilish tribulation is going to be extremely perilous for our human race, but it's also a brilliant opportunity for body integration cultivators like us. Failure is not an option for this trip. Otherwise, we'll remain at the body integration stage for the rest of our lives," the Long family patriarch said as a look of vicious determination appeared on his face. "You're right, Brother Long, but before this, we have to keep the Elder Devil race at bay first." The black-robed man agreed with a nod before turning toward a certain part of the giant city behind them. "I've gathered 13 major families to create this stronghold, and each city can defend one another. Regardless of whether it's the number of high-grade cultivators present or the defensive capabilities of the stronghold, this place definitely isn't inferior to the 3 sovereign cities. Even if this devilish tribulation is going to be more fearsome than the rumors suggest, this stronghold should be able to stand strong," the Long family patriarch said in a confident manner. "I'm also firmly of the same opinion. Otherwise, I wouldn't have collaborated with you, Brother Long. Seeing as that Han brat's gone, let's go back and take care of our own matters as well. The devilish mark is becoming larger and larger. The Elder Devil race will most likely descend upon us in around 3 or 4 months, so we have to make ample preparations," the black-robed man said in a solemn manner. "Indeed, I have a cauldron of important pills that I'm currently refining as well," the Long family patriarch said with a nod before sweeping a sleeve through the air to expel a burst of golden light. The light enveloped his body, and he flew toward the massive city as a ball of golden light. The black-robed man also made a hand seal upon seeing this, and followed along as a black gust of wind. Meanwhile, Han Li was already several thousand kilometers away, and a little after 2 months, Han Li finally returned to Deep Heaven City via teleportation formation. At this point, the entire city was in a state of high alert, and all of the restriction formations had been semi-activated. If it weren't for the fact that Han Li was a body integration cultivator, he most likely wouldn't even have been granted access to the teleportation formations. Han Li flew straight back to the pagoda that he and his disciples were living in before giving them the giant Atlas Ark, then instructed them to get all of the disciples to familiarize themselves with the treasure as quickly as possible. The giant Atlas Ark could only display its true power when used by a certain number of people, so this was a life-saving trump card that Han Li was leaving to his disciples. Otherwise, with their nascent soul stage cultivation bases, it would be very difficult to say whether they'd be able to survive the devilish tribulation. After that, Han Li returned to the top level of the pagoda and went into seclusion again. However, on this occasion, he instructed his disciples to keep an eye on the devilish mark and to give him daily reports on the changes displayed by it. Thus, one day passed by after another, and the atmosphere in Deep Heaven City was only becoming tenser and tenser. Not only did the devilish marks near Deep Heaven City encompass an area of tens of thousands of kilometers, they were becoming glossy black, and there were even some patches where churning devilish chi could be clearly seen. However, the devilish marks near Deep Heaven City weren't that massive compared to the ones in the other parts of the human regions. It was said that the largest of the devilish marks had appeared near the city of the newly assigned spirit sovereign, and it was over 100 times larger than the devilish marks present near Deep Heaven City. Upon receiving this news, Han Li could only heave a faint sigh before casting the matter out of his mind. Letter 1d4 BB letter 1d6 3 letter 1d6 26 letter 1d6 26 letter 1d6 38 letter 2 1 2f letter 1d6 24 letter 1d4 5c letter 1d6 2e. On this day, there were two shimmering golden flying arcs situated near an inky black devilish mark that was countless kilometers in size. The two arcs were several tens of feet in length each, and they were concealed within a lush forest that was close to 10 kilometers away. On each of the two arcs were two golden-armored heavenly guards and several black-armored guards, and these people were currently discussing something in hushed tones with grim looks on their faces. Brother Chen, I've been feeling very uneasy these past few days. Is this a sign that the devilish tribulation is about to commence soon? A golden-armored man with a pair of thick muscle-bound arms said with furrowed brows. You're not the only one, fellow Taoist Jin. I've been feeling very anxious ever since I was deployed here to keep tabs on this devilish mark. Thankfully, that's the extent of our role, and as soon as the devilish mark is broken, we can immediately activate the teleportation formation to return to the city, so there's not actually that much danger involved. A short and thin elderly man replied with a wry smile. I'm also aware that this is not actually a very dangerous task, yet I still can't help but feel uneasy. It seems that I need to hone my mental state. Having said that, we really are very unlucky to have drawn lots and been assigned to this place, the burly man said in a resigned manner. Staying in the city is naturally safer, but as long as we can complete this mission, we'll be rewarded extremely handsomely, so I think the reward outweighs the risk, the elderly man said with a shake of his head. That's true. The pills offered by the panel of elders are extremely precious and will be very useful to us. Hold on, what's that? The burly man replied with a wry smile before abruptly rising to his feet. He cast his gaze toward the distance, and his expression changed drastically. Is the devilish mark about to break? The elderly man's heart jolted as he hurriedly cast his gaze toward the same direction, as did the black-armored guards, and all of their faces immediately turned completely pale. A vast expanse of space beneath the devilish mark in the distance had suddenly begun to twist and writhe violently, as if the heavens were about to be flipped onto its head. Right at this moment, an earth-shattering boom rang out, and countless demonic bats that were each over 10 feet in length emerged from the churning devilish chi within the devilish mark. All of the bats had skin that was as red as blood and a single black horn on each of their heads. They opened their mouths, and bursts of sound waves surged forth in a frenzy toward the warped space down below. The countless bursts of sound wave struck the space down below before exploding in violent waves, and earth-shattering booms instantly rang out from the warped sky. In the next instant, several long white rifts suddenly appeared on the devilish mark, and as the sound waves continued to surge through the air, the sound of shattering glass began to ring out. The white rifts instantly transformed into countless white threads that spread rapidly in all directions, following which the entire sky completely shattered. Inky black devilish chi surged forth like floodwaters through a broken dam, instantly forming a sea of darkness that dispersed in all directions at an incredible speed. The countless giant devil bats also descended in a frenzy, while letting loose a series of high-pitched screeches. Crimson light revolved around their bodies, and from a distance, it looked as if countless balls of crimson flames had appeared within the sea of darkness before also spreading in all directions. What was even more astonishing was that, within the depths of the devilish mark, which had already transformed into a massive black hole, even more astonishing roars could be heard, and it was quite clear that there were going to be more devilish beasts flooding into the spirit realm. In the distance, the golden-armored burly man finally returned to his senses, and hurriedly said to the elderly man in a hushed voice, "The elder devil race is invading. Our mission is complete. Activate the teleportation formation right away." Activate the teleportation formation. The elderly man instructed without any hesitation, then made a hand seal before casting a series of incantation seals into a small formation beneath his feet. The black-armored guards standing behind him hurriedly arrived by his side, before also making hand seals to assist him. A faint buzzing sound immediately rang out from the golden arc underfoot, and hundreds of runes appeared down below, before then forming a white light formation. The same was happening to the other golden arc as well. The two arcs began to release scintillating golden light, and they were going to be teleported away at any moment now. The golden-armored burly man heaved a long sigh of relief upon seeing this, and his expression finally eased slightly. However, right at this moment, a high-pitched voice suddenly rang out in the air above the forest they were hiding in. Letter 1D557, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D556, letter 1D410, letter 1D430, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D680, letter 1D428, letter 1D696. He looks like I'm in luck. I've only just entered the spirit realm, and I've already come across a pair of spatial tempering cultivators. You two will be perfect for an appetizer. Both the burly man and the elderly man were stunned to hear this voice, and they turned to discover a hideous young man standing just over 300 feet away from the two golden arcs. The man was very short and thin, with a dark complexion and a pair of bat wings on his back. His facial features were extremely sinister, and his wings were even larger than his body. He bore a striking resemblance to the countless crimson devilish bats in the sky, but the aura he was releasing was countless times more powerful. It's a high-grade devilish being. Both of the heavenly guards naturally instantly identified the young man, and they were extremely alarmed. Both of them had been focusing their attention on the changes unfolding in the devilish mark, yet they had completely failed to notice as this young man approached them from above. After a brief moment of astonishment, both of them immediately sprang into action without any hesitation. One of them laid a hand onto the back of his own head, and a dozen or so small silver swords instantly shot forth before flying through the air as streaks of silver light. Meanwhile, the other heavenly guard raised an arm, and a five-colored ring was summoned. The ring then transformed into countless five-colored ring projections that formed a protective barrier around the two golden arcs. One of them was attacking the enemy as the other was setting up defenses, and it was quite clear that this wasn't the first time they had fought alongside one another. Their objective wasn't to defeat this high-grade devilish being. They only wanted to keep the young man at bay for a short while so they could complete their teleportation. A sinister smile appeared on the young man's face, revealing two rows of sharp little fangs. In the face of the oncoming streaks of silver light, he made no effort to take evasive measures. Instead, he opened his mouth to blast forth a burst of golden sound waves that swept up all of the streaks of silver light. An astonishing scene then ensued. The streaks of sword chi immediately reverted back into their original sword form amid an anguished wail, then tumbled down from above amid the golden sound waves. The golden-armored burly man's face immediately paled upon seeing this. Those swords were his bonded treasures that he had been cultivating for several millennia, yet before he could recover his control over the swords, the young man suddenly flapped his bat wings, and the sounds of howling winds and rumbling thunderclaps immediately rang out. The young man's body blurred slightly before he abruptly vanished on the spot. However, in the next instant, he reappeared right above the two golden arcs before launching his fists toward the countless five-colored ring projections in the air without any hesitation. Two resounding booms rang out in quick succession as a pair of shimmering crimson fists vanquished all of the opposing five-colored projections. The young man flapped his wings again, and he appeared behind the burly man in the blink of an eye before plunging an arm through his body with ease. The suit of golden armor didn't offer any resistance to the young man's attack. Arg! The black-armored guards on the golden arc were naturally petrified upon seeing this, and they immediately fled for their lives. However, the young man merely swept a bat wing behind himself without even turning his head to unleash a black blade of light that was over 1,000 feet in length. The blade was as fast as lightning, and all of the black-armored guards let loose howls of anguish as they were reduced to a rain of blood. Even the nascent souls within their bodies had been destroyed. The young man then flew toward the other golden arc as a ball of crimson light, and even prior to his arrival, the overwhelming odor of blood and gore had already settled over the arc. The elderly man had no time to react, and his face instantly became deathly pale. Coincidentally, the teleportation formation beneath his feet flashed with white light right at this moment, and he was teleported away, along with the entire golden arc. As such, the young man only managed to pounce on empty air, and the ball of crimson light around him faded. A hint of frustration appeared on his face as he looked at the remnants of the teleportation formation in the air, and he swept a bat wing violently through the air, releasing a gust of fierce winds that erased what remained of the formation. Haha, I can't believe you couldn't even kill a pair of spatial tempering stage humans. I was holding back and leaving them to you, but it looks like I've overestimated you. A burst of cackling that was filled with mockery suddenly rang out from behind a huge tree nearby. Meng Man, when did you get here? Isn't your lightning cow race supposed to part of the second group to enter the spirit realm? HMPH, If it weren't for that teleportation formation, there's no way those humans would have escaped from me." The young man immediately flared up with rage in response before turning his gaze toward that huge tree. The ordinary-looking tree suddenly warped before transforming into a green-skinned giant that was around 50 to 60 feet tall. The giant had a pair of curved black horns on his head, and his face was covered in yellow fur. He wore a suit of black leather armor, and there was a pair of golden hatchets strapped onto his back. He was currently appraising the young man with a mocking look in his eyes, and in response to the young man's enraged expression, he merely smiled and said in a nonchalant manner, "Our lightning cow race recently received an order from the sacred ancestors, instructing us to be among the first group to enter the spirit realm alongside your devilish bat race, so my brethren have already entered this realm." After that, the cow-headed giant pointed into the distant sky in a nonchalant manner. "Is that so?" The young man was quite surprised to hear this, and he hurriedly cast his gaze toward the same direction. There, he discovered that aside from the giant bats pouring out of the gargantuan black hole up above, huge azure cows that were around 100 feet in length each were also rushing out from within. Not only were these cows astonishingly huge, their bodies were also covered in strange silver patterns, presenting a very mysterious sight to behold. HMPH, if it's an order from the sacred ancestors, then it can't be helped, but you clumsy cows will only slow us down. With the speed of our devilish bat race, it'll only take us a few days to clear out all of the human cultivators in the nearby area so we can begin building a devilish city," the young man said in a slightly sheepish manner. "That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Your devilish bat race will naturally be able to sweep through low-grade human cultivators with ease, but if you encounter some more powerful humans, you devilish bat beings will be nothing more than cannon fodder. There's no way you can compare with our lightning cow race." The giant chuckled coldly. The young man was furious to hear this. "Is that so? Then how about we see which of our two races can kill more human cultivators in the next 3 days? Sure, and just to make things interesting, the loser has to hand over a third of what they plunder from the spirit realm to the winner," the giant said, as a cold light flashed through his eyes. "You have yourself a bet," the young man said in a cold manner before flapping his wings, flying over to the giant in the blink of an eye before extending a shimmering crimson hand. The giant chuckled in a sinister manner before swinging one of his huge hands toward the young man's hand, and the two palms clashed amid a dull thump. In the instant that they came into contact with one another, crimson and azure light erupted forth, following which both the young man and the giant swayed slightly before springing back as if they had been bitten by a snake. As soon as the young man stabilized himself in midair, he yelled with a baleful expression, "Where are the 5 bats? We pay our respects to the revered general." As soon as this voice trailed off, spatial fluctuations erupted nearby, and 5 crimson bats that were far more enormous than their brethren appeared amid gusts of fierce winds. These bats each had a wingspan in excess of 100 feet, and they were truly astonishingly massive. "Go and capture a few human mortals," the young man instructed. "Yes, master," the 5 giant bats immediately replied before flapping their wings and vanishing again as 5 gusts of wind. A cold smile appeared on the cow-headed giant's face upon seeing this, and he suddenly flipped a hand over to produce a golden horn before bringing it to his lips and blowing vigorously into it. A long, continuous note immediately rang out, and it was imbued with an indescribable primal aura. As soon as they heard this sound, the eyes of the giant azure cows in the distance immediately turned bright red. Steam began to billow out of their mouths and nostrils, and they snarled ferociously as they charged out of the surging black chi before converging toward the giant. The sound from the horn then suddenly changed, and the sound of metal clashing against metal abruptly rang out alongside that single continuous note. Immediately thereafter, the giant flew away into the distance as a streak of silver light, and tens of thousands of lightning cows followed along behind him like an unstoppable wave. The young man's lips twitched slightly upon seeing this, and he also let loose a sharp cry. A stir immediately ran through the devilish bats as well upon hearing this sound, and they dispersed in all directions as a dozen or so crimson clouds, as if they had all been issued an order. The number of devilish bats exceeded that of the lightning cows by more than tenfold, and even though they had been split up into a dozen or so groups, each group still had over 10,000 devilish bats. 2 of the groups immediately flew in the same direction the horde of lightning cows had just departed toward, seemingly completely unconcerned about being discovered by the lightning cows. Meanwhile, the young man himself flew into the largest of the crimson clouds as a streak of crimson light. And not longer after that, all of the devilish beasts that had emerged from the sea of devilish chi had departed from the scene, allowing peace and quiet to return to the area. However, no more than 10 minutes later, a burst of loud hissing suddenly rang out as the devilish chi surged violently, and a series of giant glossy black pythons emerged from within. These pythons ranged from around 200 feet in length to as long as over 1,000 feet. Furthermore, all of these pythons had a crimson eye on each of their foreheads. This was a horde of extremely rare three-eyed devilish pythons. There were clearly far fewer giant pythons than there had been lightning cows and devilish bats, with only around 5,000 to 6,000 of them in total. However, the collective aura they were releasing was far more fearsome than the previous two types of devilish beasts. The largest of the pythons was over 3,000 feet in length, and standing atop its head was a high-grade devilish being wearing a black mask and a suit of menacing azure armor. He had his arms crossed as he inspected his surroundings, and he seemed to be rather taken aback by the absence of the two types of devilish beasts that had emerged before the giant pythons. However, he then abruptly stomped down onto the devilish python beneath his feet, and the python immediately reared up with its upper body before letting loose a thunderous hissing sound. Crimson light then flashed from the massive python's forehead, and a pair of strange crimson horns appeared on its head, while its back bulged and writhed before a pair of fleshy azure wings emerged. All of the surrounding three-eyed devilish pythons immediately rushed out of the devilish chi upon seeing this, then raised their heads and hissed in unison, as if they were paying homage to their king. Only the azure-armored devilish being remained completely still on the giant python's head, with an extremely cold look in his eyes. It's only been 10,000 years since we last met, yet this bonded python of yours has evolved once again. It's probably powerful enough to oppose an early body integration stage being now, right, brother way. A male voice suddenly rang out after all of the pythons had emerged from the devilish chi. Immediately thereafter, a gust of wind blew past, and a strange insect that was over 10 feet in length appeared. This insect had a purple body and a pair of long and thin feelers. Its mouth was filled with sharp fangs, and it had a pair of front limbs that resembled giant blades, much like those of a praying mantis. There was also a small humanoid figure, who was only around 3 feet tall, standing atop the giant insect. This was a young child who appeared to only be around 7 to 8 years of age, and his hair was arranged into a pair of braids that pointed directly upward. He wore a green Taoist robe with 3 small golden swords strapped to each shoulder, and his large, bright eyes were very adorable to behold. Greetings, Brother Hunju. My bonded python was only able to reach this stage after I fed it a rare spirit herb that I unintentionally stumbled upon. It seems that your powers have also been enhanced since we last met, the azure-armored devilish being said in a cold voice as he turned his frosty gaze toward the young child. I've been preparing for many years for this trip into the spirit realm, so it's only natural that I've improved somewhat, the young child replied with a smile. Seeing as our two races have both arrived, let's join forces. I'm sure even the most powerful of the human cultivators in this area won't be able to withstand our collective forces, the azure-armored devilish being suggested. My thoughts exactly. The young child agreed to the proposal in an elated manner before suddenly yelling into the devilish chi, "Come on out, my children." As soon as his voice trailed off, a buzzing sound rang out from within the sea of devilish chi. Initially, it wasn't very loud, but the sound quickly crescendoed as countless devilish insects surged out of the black chi in a frenzy. These devilish insects were each around the size of a human head, and they were like identical miniature replicas of the giant praying mantis beneath the young child's feet. There were so many of them that they virtually encompassed the entire heavens, and the torrential outpour of devilish insects continued for a long while before finally drawing to a halt. These insects flapped their short purple wings as they hovered at a low altitude beneath the devilish chi, and there were around 700,000 to 800,000 of them. Such an enormous swarm of insects would present an extremely harrowing sight even to a body integration cultivator. However, the azure-armored devilish being wasn't alarmed by this at all. He let loose a low cry, and all of the three-eyed devilish pythons around him immediately surged downward, then vanished into the soil amid flashes of spiritual light. After that, he tapped his foot against his giant python steed, and it flew off toward a certain direction as a burst of azure light. The young child chuckled upon seeing this before letting loose a long cry. then sped off toward the same direction atop his giant devilish insect steed. A stir ran through the fearsome swarm of insects upon hearing this sound, and they immediately followed along as an enormous sea of insects. After that, more hordes of devilish beasts of different numbers and appearances emerged from the devilish chi, then rushed off toward different directions, led by high-grade devilish beings from their respective races. Judging from their erratic actions, it seemed that they didn't have any set targets. After a total of 13 waves of devilish beasts had emerged from the sea of churning devilish chi, peace and quiet resumed once again. On this occasion, a full hour passed before the devilish chi began to churn again. The sound of dull drumming rang out from within, followed by a series of resounding booms. The entire sea of devilish chi was stirred up into a frenzy, and arcs of silver lightning appeared without any warning alongside rumbling thunderclaps. At the same time, violent spatial fluctuations erupted forth, and the gargantuan sea of devilish chi suddenly expanded by over a third of its original size. Immediately thereafter, hundreds of massive objects slowly emerged from the depths of the devilish chi. These objects resembled inky black pyramids with giant shimmering silver runes engraved onto their surfaces. The undersides of these pyramids were several tens of kilometers in size, and they descended from the heavens like a series of small cities. However, it wasn't a simple matter for these gigantic structures to descend. As soon as they appeared, they were bombarded relentlessly by the silver lightning within the devilish chi. Furthermore, ripples were constantly surging and warping over their surfaces, as if they were threatening to tear the structures apart. The silver runes on these giant pyramids lit up to ward off all of the resistance, and they finally began to slowly land on the ground amid earth-shattering booms, instantly erasing all of the mountains, forests, and rivers beneath them. Only after close to 2 hours did these gigantic objects finally all complete their landings, and immediately thereafter, a resounding boom rang out as the silver runes on one of the faces of each pyramid lit up. A series of massive silver gates then appeared on those faces before slowly opening outward, and the sound of rumbling drumming erupted from within the gargantuan pyramids. One glossy black canoe after another surged out of the huge silver gates, and each canoe was only just over 100 feet in length. They were all entirely enshrouded in layers of black light, and there was an extremely menacing fiend celestial carved onto the front of each of the canoes, while a dozen or so extremely sharp and long blades were protruding out of each of the canoes, 2 sides. Through the black light, one could just barely make out 5 or 6 armored devilish beings seated on each canoe while holding sharp blades. These canoes didn't fly for very far. They merely began to revolve in the air around the giant pyramid they had each emerged from. After over 100 black canoes had been released out of each pyramid, groups of red-armored winged devilish beings began to emerge. They were either wielding long halberds or bows and arrows, and in the instant they surged out of the silver gates, they rose up into the air before dispersing in all directions as if they were standing guard. Spiritual light then flashed from the silver gates, and streaks of light of different colors erupted forth from within. As the light faded, a series of humanoid figures appeared in midair. These humanoid figures were comprised of both men and women, and some of them wore long robes, some were clad in suits of armor, and there were even some who were wearing nothing on their upper bodies. However, one thing that they had in common was that all of them were enshrouded in churning devilish chi. A series of cracks and pops rang out from the bodies of several of these humanoid figures, and they quickly transformed into devilish beings with 2 heads and 4 arms. Their original heads retained their initial appearance, but their second heads were all extremely sinister and terrifying to behold. Following their transformations, these devilish beings raised their heads and roared up into the heavens with excitement and bloodlust, as if they could barely hold back their desire for slaughter. The other devilish beings who hadn't yet transformed all turned to their companions with disdainful expressions. One of them was an elderly man with a head of red hair and a hook nose, and after appraising the lush scenery in the distance with a complex look in his eyes for a while, he murmured to himself, "I didn't think that I would get to see this again during my lifetime. Even if I perish in this realm, I won't have any regrets." The red-haired elderly man's voice had been very quiet, but it was still overheard by one of his companions. This was another elderly man in a set of black robes with a golden belt around his waist, and he chuckled, "Why so pessimistic, Brother Shah? The sacred ancestors have already informed us that this sacred ceremony will be very different from those held in the past. If everything goes according to plan, our race could completely take over an area of the spirit realm. If we can make significant contributions during the sacred sacrifice, then we can apply to stay in the spirit realm to guard our territory here. This is an extremely rare opportunity for those like us who have ascended to the Elder Devil realm. You're right, Brother Senyang. We ascended to the Elder Devil realm, so we've become members of the Elder Devil race. However, it would naturally be vastly fortunate for us if we could remain in the spirit realm following this battle, the red-haired elderly man replied with a nod. The same conversation was taking place in hushed tones among everyone else. Right at this moment, a rumbling noise suddenly rang out from within the silver gates of the giant pyramids, following which everyone was greeted by the sound of a series of extremely heavy footsteps. The runes around the silver gates flashed, and more groups of devilish beings suddenly emerged. These devilish beings had cracked gray skin that was completely devoid of hair, looking as if they were stone golems. They were just barely humanoid in shape, but each of them had 4 thick arms, and every single one of their footsteps made the nearby earth tremble, clearly indicating that they were astonishingly heavy. These stone devils were each over 100 feet tall, and over 1,000 of them emerged from each giant pyramid. They then stood in front of the pyramids and arranged themselves into several orderly rows, looking much more docile and organized than expected. Their leaders then let loose low roars in unison, and gray light began to flash from the bodies of these stone devils, following which they disintegrated into what appeared to be soft mud and disappeared into the soil down below. Moments later, the earth within a radius of thousands of kilometers abruptly began to tremor, following which the ground abruptly tore open. Yellow light flashed, and one earthen wall after another erupted out of the ground. In no more than 10 minutes, an enormous city wall that stretched for hundreds of thousands of kilometers had been erected. However, even though the wall was over 1,000 feet tall, it was extremely crude and rough. There was earth and soil constantly crumbling off its surface, and it seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Right at this moment, spiritual light flashed from the ground in front of the wall, and the gray stone devils re-emerged before quickly thrusting their palms toward it. As they did so, pillars of light that were as thick as large bowls erupted from their hands and struck the earthen wall, following which a string of crackling sounds rang out. Upon being struck by the pillars of light, gray flowers of light bloomed all over the wall before spreading in all directions. All of the soft and vulnerable earth was then transformed resolute gray stone in the wake of this gray light. These stone devils possessed the ability to transform earth into stone. As a result, under the collective efforts of so many stone devils, the enormous earthen structure was virtually instantly transformed into a seamless city wall. The same rumbling sounds were incessantly ringing out in other directions as well, as other sections of the wall were rapidly being erected. Thus, within the span of 2 hours, everything within a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers had been encompassed within this massive stone wall. At this point, a series of indistinct ghostly figures that were enshrouded in black chi flew out of the pyramids. These ghostly figures flew in a completely weightless manner, as if they possessed no physical bodies, and they all flew into the city wall, upon which a series of formations of different sizes appeared on the wall's surface. Aside from the size disparities, all of the formations were completely identical, as if they had been engraved by the same person. After that, the ghostly figures re-emerged and flew back into the giant pyramids, paying no heed to the other devilish beings present. Thus, time slowly passed, and a city of stone was being quickly erected beneath the sea of devilish chi. The stone devils worked tirelessly, constructing buildings of other styles around the giant stone pyramids, which stood at the center of the city. There were also some high-grade devilish beings who were setting up some profound restrictions in each corner, and layers of restriction fluctuations soon enshrouded the entire massive city. All of a sudden, spiritual light flashed from the tip of the pyramid that was situated at the very center of the city, and it abruptly parted. A resounding rumbling noise rang out, and a giant sacrificial altar that looked as if it had been entirely stained with blood slowly rose up. There were a series of unintelligible ancient characters inscribed around the altar, and an overwhelming odor of blood and gore erupted from it. What was even more peculiar was that at the center of the altar stood a tall and broad humanoid figure, who was entirely enshrouded within a layer of crimson light. As soon as this humanoid figure appeared, all of the high-grade devilish beings present knelt down on one knee with solemn looks on their faces. The devilish beings that were further away didn't know what was going on, but they all immediately followed suit as well. The collective voice of countless devilish beings then rang out in unison. "We pay our respects to sacred ancestor Zhu Guang." However, the humanoid figure on the altar paid no heed to this. He merely inspected his surroundings in an indifferent manner before looking up at the sea of devilish chi overhead. The humanoid figure's eyes were as piercing and dazzling as stars, creating a very unforgettable sight. All of a sudden, he raised an arm before extending a translucent palm, then waved it through the air, seemingly in a nonchalant manner. An earth-shattering boom immediately rang out, and close to half of the devilish chi within the inky black sea up above suddenly began to churn violently. The devilish chi then converged in a frenzy before forming a massive inky black staff amid a flash of spiritual light. The staff was shaped like a worm with a ghostly head, and it had peculiar patterns running all over its surface. It descended toward the sacrificial altar, and the fingers on the crimson figure's outstretched hand moved ever so slightly. The enormous staff, which was over 1,000 feet in length, began to shrink during its descent, and by the time it landed in sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's grasp, it had shrunk down to only around 20 feet in length. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang held the staff in one hand and began to chant a solemn incantation. As he did so, the menacing ghostly head on the top of the staff opened its silver ghostly eyes, then opened its mouth to expel a series of black runes. These runes then quickly transformed into giant black flowers that drifted toward all parts of the city. After a short while, the giant flowers had spread to every corner of the city. Right at this moment, sacred ancestor Zhu Guang's chanting ceased, and he abruptly rubbed the black staff between both of his hands, upon which it exploded into a ball of black light. The black light rippled and proliferated outward in all directions as invisible spiritual fluctuations. Upon coming into contact with these fluctuations, the giant black flowers instantly exploded, forming bursts of inky black devilish chi that permeated through the air. Thus, the entire giant city was instantly enshrouded under boundless devilish chi. In the instant that this devilish chi settled over the bodies of all of the half-knelt devilish beings present, all of them were instantly reinvigorated, and their magic power and energy all began to recover at a rapid rate. Sacred ancestor Zhu Guang clasped his hands behind his back, then ordered in an implacable voice, "Construct 3 more sacred cities within 3 days, then rest for 7 days. After everyone has gathered, immediately attack the largest human cultivator stronghold nearby." "Your wish is our command." Countless devilish beings cheered in unison within the giant city. Meanwhile, the same scenes were unfolding beneath all of the devilish marks in the human and demon territories. Under the largest of those devilish marks, there was a huge human city that had been constructed along a gargantuan tree that stretched all the way up to the heavens. Several body integration cultivators were standing in the air above a certain pavilion that was halfway up the tree, and they were all appraising the sea of devilish chi in the distance with grim expressions. Thousands of kilometers away from heavenly Yuan sovereign city, a monk and a Taoist priest were wielding a copper mirror and a round bowl, respectively, unleashing countless streaks of light from the 2 treasures to slay a group of devilish beings with snake heads and horse bodies. However, a sharp hiss of fury suddenly rang out in the distance, following which a gust of devilish wind blew toward them at an incredible speed. "Run, the high-grade devilish beings are coming," the Taoist priest immediately yelled upon seeing this. Immediately thereafter, spiritual light flashed from the bodies of both him and the monk, and they flew directly toward the heavenly Yuan sovereign city. On a barren plain in the territory of the demon race, there were several armies engaged in a fierce war. One side was comprised of hundreds of thousands of gray wolves, while the other consisted of over 10,000 blue devilish lions. The wolves were each several tens of feet in length, and they all had green light flashing within their eyes. They were clearly low-grade demon beasts that possessed some demonic power. In contrast, the blue devilish lions were even larger than these giant wolves. All of them had short black horns that were several inches in length on their heads, and they were blasting attacks such as fireballs and ice spikes out of their mouths. As these 2 armies were battling one another, there was also an extremely grueling battle taking place up above between thousands of snowy white giant falcons and a horde of 2-headed flying snakes. The white falcons had powerful talons with silver arcs of lightning revolving around them, while the 2-headed snakes were able to expel extremely lethal poison out of their mouths. Beings from both sides were constantly falling from above, but as soon as their carcasses landed among the lions and wolves down below, they were instantly devoured without a trace. Close to 1,000 kilometers behind the armies were groups of metamorphosis staged demonic cultivators and high-grade devilish beings appraising one another from afar. They didn't participate in the battle. They merely looked on as the battle unfolded before their eyes. In the air above a certain area of the ocean, a burst of black chi that stretched for as far as the eyes could see was currently surging toward a city on a certain massive island. Within the black chi were countless devilish shadows, and it seemed that there was a massive army enshrouded within it. All of a sudden, a thunderous dragon's roar erupted from the seabed near the island, immediately following which howling winds were swept up alongside enormous waves. These waves then parted, and an azure beast that was over 100,000 feet in length emerged from within the ocean. The surface of the beast's head was covered in moss and stones, making it impossible to glean its true appearance. It cast its gaze toward the oncoming black chi with a cold look in its murky eyes, then opened its gargantuan mouth, which resembled a bottomless abyss. A resounding rumbling boom rang out, and the entire surface of the ocean began to tremor. Bursts of blue light erupted out of the creature's enormous mouth in a frenzy, then transformed into blue tornadoes that surged toward the black chi. There were tens of thousands of devilish beasts within the black chi, but they were completely no match for those tornadoes and were quickly swept up by them. Due to the astonishing amount of seawater that had been sucked into the gigantic creature's mouth, the nearby sea level momentarily fell, and after all of the devilish beasts were devoured by the creature, it closed its eyes and slowly sank into the ocean again. Thus, peace and quiet instantly returned to the area, and it was as if that menacing burst of devilish chi had never even appeared here. On another huge island in the distance, there was a tall and broad humanoid figure standing atop a tall tower, appraising everything from afar with a cold look in his eyes. Meanwhile, at Deep Heaven City 1, Han Li was seated on the top level of a pagoda with his legs crossed. He was making a hand seal, and his eyes were closed. There was a golden gourd and the myriad sword artwork hovering in front of him, and he seemed to be in a special, immersive state. All of a sudden, he opened his eyes and switched to a different hand seal before pointing a finger at the golden gourd. The gourd shuddered as spiritual light flashed from its surface, and a series of extremely dazzling five-colored runes appeared. Immediately thereafter, a buzzing sound rang out, and the gourd was opened, following which 5 flying swords flew out from within. The swords were of the colors gold, yellow, azure, red, and blue, and they were each only around an inch in length. However, they were all radiating a dreamy translucent light that gave them a very mysterious appearance. The 5 flying swords emitted a crisp ringing sound at Han Li's behest, then shot up into the air before unleashing their respective abilities. The red flying sword transformed into a fiery snake that was around 10 feet in length amid a dull thump, while the blue flying sword released wisps of vapor that instantly formed a series of clouds, making it very difficult to track the sword. However, the most astonishing ability was displayed by the seemingly most mundane and nondescript yellow flying sword. It elongated to over 100 feet in length in an instant, and spiritual light swirled over its surface before transforming into layers of a hard yellow substance. Looking at the sword from afar, it was as if it had become a giant yellow stone sword, and as it was swung through the air, even the space in its wake began to emit a loud buzzing sound, clearly indicating that this was an astonishingly powerful weapon. As for the golden and azure flying swords, they didn't display much change aside from emitting bursts of dazzling light. The 5 flying swords danced and pursued one another through the air, and they seemed to possess a very high level of spiritual nature. Han Li appraised these flying swords with a calm expression, then made a hand seal shortly thereafter. The 5 swords immediately reverted back to their original forms at his behest before flying back into the golden gourd. Only then did Han Li turn his attention toward the myriad sword artwork, and a slightly solemn look appeared in his eyes. All of a sudden, he raised a hand to cast several incantation seals in quick succession, all of which vanished into the artwork in a flash. The artwork immediately began to emit a series of sharp ringing sounds, following which dazzling golden light erupted from it. The countless swords inscribed on its surface gradually began to move, then multiplied at a rapid rate. All of the swords on the artwork seemed to have sprung to life in the blink of an eye. Han Li let loose a low cry, and a burst of azure spiritual chi was expelled out of his mouth, then vanished into the artwork. A burst of metallic clangs immediately rang out from within the myriad sword artwork, following which countless sword projections erupted out of the artwork in a frenzy. All of a sudden, a burst of bone-chilling sword chi had settled over the entire hall. Black light flashed from Han Li's glabella, and his law-destruction eye emerged. Piercing black light swirled within the eye as an enormous burst of spiritual sense erupted forth before vanishing into the myriad sword artwork. Golden light instantly flashed from all of the sword projections in the hall, and they began to slowly revolve around Han Li. Initially, they were only moving at a snail's pace, but after just the span of a few breaths, they were swimming through the air like small, sprightly fish. Furthermore, they had formed a sword formation with a tremendous aura. Han Li suddenly switched to a different hand seal as he prepared to activate the enormous magic power within his own body. But right at this moment, the myriad sword artwork shuddered as it let loose a low ringing sound, and the spiritual light radiating from it abruptly faded. The golden sword projections dancing through the hall also became blurry and indistinct, before finally blinking out of existence. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li's law-destruction eye also vanished in a flash. His expression changed slightly, and he turned toward the golden gourd and myriad sword artwork with furrowed brows. The golden gourd was something that he had obtained from the vast glacial realm, and due to the fact that it could potentially have belonged to an immortal, he naturally held it in very high regard and had constantly been studying it. Thankfully, he had already mastered beveled silver text and golden seal text. As such, even though the refinement method for this treasure was far different from those used in the human world and spirit realm, and the flying swords in the gourd hadn't yet been completely refined, he was still able to understand some of the intricacies of the treasure. As a result, he made use of his own analysis and expended some precious materials of the 5 elements, and finally managed to just barely completely refine the entire treasure. However, the flying swords in the gourd were originally all of the metal element, but he had refined them to become a set of 5 elemental flying swords. Thus, the treasure definitely wouldn't be as powerful as what its original owner had envisioned, but it was definitely no less powerful than the average spirit treasure. Even so, with Han Li's current enormous wealth, a treasure of this caliber wasn't going to be very useful to him. As such, he was planning to examine the treasure to ensure that there was nothing wrong with it, then pass it down to one of his disciples. As for the phenomenon that had just been conjured up by the myriad sword artwork, that was a result of inspiration that Han Li had derived from a secret technique of a certain foreign race. Using this secret technique, he was able to refine the astonishing sword chi imbued within the artwork using a special method, thereby allowing him to use the artwork as a normal offensive treasure. The sword chi within the artwork had originated in the true immortal realm, so if he could completely harness and control it, it would undoubtedly be immensely powerful. If even a body integration cultivator were to be attacked by all of the sword chi within the artwork, they would be killed for sure. Unfortunately, this refinement method was very time-consuming, and he had spent all of his time improving his own magic power, so this artwork was only halfway refined. Furthermore, due to the fact there was no source or origin to the sword chi within the myriad sword artwork, if the sword chi were to be completely exhausted, then the artwork would be completely ruined. At present, he still hadn't completely gleaned the sword observation art imbued within the artwork, so prior to completely refining this treasure, he wasn't going to use it unless he absolutely had to. Otherwise, if the sword observation art were to be destroyed, he would lose an extremely valuable asset. After failing yet again in his attempt to control the myriad sword artwork, Han Li was just contemplating whether he should try once more when his expression suddenly changed slightly, and he abruptly reached behind himself with one hand. A ball of fire surged through the gates behind him and landed in his grasp in a flash. He closed his fingers around the fireball, and it immediately exploded. At the same time, Hai Yueshan's urgent voice rang out from within the flames. "Master, the panel of elders just sent someone to invite you to the Skyview platform. It seems that devilish beings have begun to gather, and there are even high-grade devilish beings among them." Han Li's heart jolted upon hearing this, and a contemplative look appeared on his face as he murmured to himself, "High-grade devilish beings, eh? All right, I suppose I should go and take a look." He then swept a sleeve through the air to stow the golden gourd and myriad sword artwork away, then flew away as a streak of golden light. After emerging from the pagoda, he immediately flew toward the border of Deep Heaven City. At his current speed, it only took him less than an hour to reach the city wall. At this moment, The entire sky outside the city wall was filled with devilish chi, and there was not a ray of sunlight to be seen. It seemed that someone had unleashed an extremely powerful technique to completely block out the suns. Beneath the devilish chi, the sound of war drums could be heard, and within Deep Heaven City, there were groups of armor-clad warriors and cultivators rushing out of the giant towers. They were either wielding weapons or treasures, and they flew directly toward their designated posts with extremely solemn looks on their faces. A series of altar-like platforms also slowly emerged from the formations on the giant city wall, and atop these platforms were huge objects such as round discs or giant cones. Round each of the objects stood 7 or 8 cultivators in long robes, and there was also a giant light barrier above Deep Heaven City that was currently radiating dazzling light. A white jade palace that resembled a miniature city had been conjured up high in the air above the city as well, and countless silver runes were revolving around it. Furthermore, countless armored guards could be seen roaming over the palace, and at the tip of the tallest pagoda-like building in the palace, there was an antiquated golden mirror with a diameter of around 100 feet. The mirror was currently reflecting dazzling light, and was acting as a replacement for the sun, shining its scintillating golden light down upon most of Deep Heaven City. In the instant that the golden light came into contact with the human warriors and cultivators down below, they were completely reinvigorated and instilled with a sense of indescribable courage that made them a lot more confident to face their enemies. Meanwhile, at the Justice League, Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly as he cast his gaze toward the white jade palace, then immediately flew directly toward it. Even before he had approached the palace, the guards had already noticed him. A golden-armored heavenly guard immediately led a dozen or so azure-armored guards to carefully approach Han Li. The heavenly guard took a quick glance at Han Li before immediately extending a salute. "May I ask if you're Senior Han? I've been instructed to wait here by the elders for your arrival. Please allow me to accompany you to the Skyview platform." "I am indeed Han Li. Please lead the way," Han Li replied in a calm manner. "Yes, please come with me, Senior," the heavenly guard said in a respectful voice as he made an inviting hand gesture. The other armored guards also parted for him in a respectful manner and stood with their hands clasped behind their backs. Thus, Han Li flew toward a tall platform in the palace, led by the heavenly guard. On the platform, Buddhist monk Jin Yue and several other Deep Heaven City elders that Han Li had met before were currently looking out at the devilish beings gathered outside Deep Heaven City. As soon as they noticed Han Li's arrival, all of them immediately smiled and extended warm greetings. Buddhist monk Jin Yue was the most familiar with Han Li, and he said in a concerned manner, "You're finally here, fellow Taoist Han. Just as the rumors suggested, this devilish tribulation really is more fierce than the previous ones." Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing this, but his expression remained unchanged as he asked, "How so? Are there a large number of high-grade devilish beasts among their ranks?" "You'll know what the situation is like when you see it, fellow Taoist," Buddhist monk Jin Yue replied as he pointed a finger into the distance. Han Li raised an eyebrow and cast his gaze toward that direction. From such a high vantage point, he was able to see everything outside the city wall. There, he was greeted by the sight of countless sinister-looking devilish beasts, stretching for several tens of kilometers. Just the sheer number of them was enough to make the onlooker's skin crawl, and at the center of this enormous army of devilish beasts were 5 gargantuan devilish beasts with bodies that resembled mountains. They were lying half-sprawled on the ground, looking at Deep Heaven City with a cold light in their eyes. The 5 gigantic beasts consisted of a crimson ape, 2 white snails, a black devilish bird with talons and feathers that looked as if they'd been constructed from steel, and a 3-headed purple python. There was a wide berth around all 5 of these beasts, and it seemed that even their fellow devilish beasts were extremely fearful of them. However, Han Li was more interested in the humanoid figures hovering in the air above these gargantuan beasts. From a distance, they appeared to be completely identical to normal humans, but there was an enormous amount of devilish chi erupting from their bodies. All of them seemed to be at the deity transformation stage or spatial tempering stage, so they comprised quite a formidable force to be reckoned with. "What are those people?" Han Li asked with his brows furrowed in befuddlement. "If I'm not mistaken, those are most likely human cultivators who ascended to the Elder Devil realm from various lower realms. However, they specialized in Devil Dao cultivation arts during their time in the lower worlds, and they've been corrupted by the devilish chi in the elder devil realm for so many years, so they can no longer even be considered as humans, the white-robed elder Gu sighed. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D563, letter 1D556, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D428, letter 1D426. Prior to this devilish tribulation, these devilish humans have never appeared. It seems that this devilish tribulation really is different from previous ones. Could it be that the elder devil race is going all out in a make-or-break bid to conquer our human race? Fairy Silverlight mused in a grim voice. And Leah praised these devilish humans for a long while before he suddenly said with furrowed brows, "Those people will indeed be very troublesome to deal with, but compared to them, I'm more interested in where all the high-grade devilish beings currently are." All of the high-grade devilish beings have concealed themselves within the devilish chi. Some of them emerged not long ago, but they've all retreated back into the devilish chi since then. It looks like they're preparing to rest before they attack our city, Buddhist monk Jin Yue replied. Have there been any sacred ancestors sighted yet? Han Li asked in a grim voice. Buddhist monk Jin Yue hesitated momentarily before offering his analysis. We haven't seen any sacred ancestors for now, but among the high-grade devilish beings that emerged earlier, there were a few body integration stage beings. However, judging from the size of this army, there's a very good chance that sacred ancestors will be lurking within the devilish chi. It's just that the elder devil realm is only just beginning to erode our spirit realm, and they're facing immense resistance from the power of our realm. Hence, sacred ancestors are still unable to descend into our spirit realm, and even if they do appear, they'll only be clones. If it's only clones, then our deep heaven city should be able to keep them at bay. Han Li's expression eased slightly upon hearing this. I certainly hope so. What we can see now is only a small portion of the elder devil race's forces. These low-grade devilish beasts have only been sent out as cannon fodder. The truly elite devilish beings still haven't appeared yet. Elder Gu had endured the last devilish tribulation, so he was well aware of just how fearsome the elder devil race was. All we can do at the moment is to react and adapt to the situation as it unfolds. Our deep heaven city is the most powerful force in the human race. If even we're unable to withstand the attack from the elder devil race, then all of the other cities are bound to fall as well. Also, according to the reports we received earlier, the Spirit Sovereign City is the main target of the elder devil race, and the devilish army that has appeared there is several times larger than this one, Fairy Silverlight said in a concerned voice. Indeed, fellow Taoist, this devilish tribulation may be far more fearsome than previous ones, but as long as we combine all of our powers, there's a very good chance that we'll be able to transcend it. Setting aside everything else, just the restriction formations and fortresses we set up outside the city wall will be enough to kill most of these devilish beasts, Buddhist monk Jin Yue said with an optimistic smile. That's true. Our deep heaven city was able to withstand that attack from the joint army of foreign beings even without any preparation, and we've been painstakingly improving the city's defenses for close to the past 1,000 years, so I'm confident that we'll be able to keep the elder devil race at bay, the burly black-robed man said in a cold voice, and he seemed to be very confident in the city's defenses. And Li merely listened to their conversation with a smile, but he was constantly inspecting the devilish chi in the distance with blue light flashing within his eyes. This devilish chi clearly wasn't normal devilish chi. Even with his spirit eyes, Han Li was only able to see around 500 meters into it. All he could make out were what appeared to be a series of arcs, flying carriages, and some armored warriors. A cold look appeared in his eyes, and just as he was about to circulate his magic power to unleash his spirit eye ability to its maximal extent, a pair of cold and forbidding eyes suddenly met his gaze, then tracked him down from a distance at an incredible speed. Han Li's heart jolted upon seeing this, and he immediately withdrew his spirit eye ability as a dark expression appeared on his face. At the same time, a faint exclamation of surprise rang out from a giant beast-drawn carriage deep within the devilish chi. Immediately thereafter, the crimson light also faded from the eyes of a thin green-robed elderly man with a head of yellow hair. "What is it? Did you see something interesting with your divine eyes?" a purple-armored man with black freckles all of his face asked. "No, it's just that there seems to be a high-grade human cultivator with a powerful eye ability as well, and I just startled him into retreating," the elderly man replied. "Oh, if the humans also have someone with a powerful eye ability, then won't they be able to see our entire setup in here?" the purple-armored man asked in an alarmed manner. Rest assured, Lord Qi, I've already set up a profound restriction within this devilish Qi using the chaotic devilish flag that was bestowed upon me by our sacred ancestors, so that man won't be able to see anything no matter how powerful his eye ability is. However, the humans have also set up powerful concealment restrictions on their end, so I'm also unable to see what defenses they've set up in the city, the green-robed elderly man said with a shake of his head. That's not important. We just have to make sure they don't see what we're up to. After all, we're just here to scout out this city, and it looks like we're in luck. If we can loot this entire city, we'll be reaping countless rewards, the purple-armored man said as an excited look appeared in his eyes. Don't underestimate this city, Lord Qi. According to the human mortals we captured earlier, this city is where the elites of the human and demon races are gathered. Even if we can conquer it, we'll definitely have to pay a heavy price to do so, the green-robed man cautioned. This is a sacred sacrifice, so it's only normal to suffer severe casualties. In any case, our sacred ancestors will have plans for how to conquer this city. We just have to act according to their orders. It's about time, so let's attack. It's unlikely that we'll be able to conquer this city on our first attack, but we have to at least scout out most of the city's defenses, the purple-armored man said with a nonchalant wave of his hand. In that case, let's begin, the elderly man agreed with a nod. Seeing as the green-robed elderly man didn't have any objections, an excited look immediately appeared in the purple-armored man's eyes. He chuckled in a sinister manner before abruptly flipping his hand over to produce a stack of small black flags. These flags were only around 7 to 8 inches in size, but each of them had a different profound diagram inscribed upon it, and they were all emanating extremely pure devilish chi fluctuations. The purple-robed man made a hand seal, then pointed a finger at the small flags, upon which 2 of them instantly vanished into thin air. In the next instant, a stir immediately ran through the 2 hordes of devilish beasts at the very front of the army, and they all let loose thunderous roars as they rushed toward the city with vicious looks in their eyes. Elder Gu's heart jolted upon seeing this, and he hurriedly said, "Those are 2-headed devilish lizards and poison devil insects. Tell the people on the front line to take extra caution." "Yes, Elder." The heavenly guard standing nearby immediately accepted the instruction before flying away as a streak of golden light to pass on the message. 2-headed devilish lizards. Are those the devilish beasts that are capable of using fire and wind attribute attacks? If I recall correctly, aren't they one of the Elder Devil Realm's top 10 species of devilish beasts? Buddhist monk Jin Yue asked. That's right. These 2-headed devilish lizards are only comparable to Qi condensation cultivators, but their numbers are simply astonishing. Apparently, in the Elder Devil realm, they number in the tens of millions. There's no way that the Elder Devil race will be able to release all of them into our spirit realm, but even just a small proportion of their total population will be very troublesome to deal with. As for those poison devil insects, they're also quite a pain to deal with. Not only is the poisonous liquid that they expel very dangerous to low-grade cultivators, it can also erode city walls, Elder Gu replied in a grim voice. There's no need to be overly concerned, Brother Gu. I'm sure the people down there know how to deal with these types of devilish beasts, Buddhist monk Jin Yue reassured in a calm manner. I certainly hope so. Elder Gu sighed before casting his gaze toward the battlefield in the distance again. There were thousands of massive fortresses that had been erected around Deep Heaven City, and each of them was over 1,000 feet tall, housing over 100 human cultivators. Faint restriction fluctuations could be seen between each fortress, indicating that they clearly weren't going to be easy to bypass, and unless these defenses were completely eradicated, the Elder Devil race wouldn't even be able to directly attack the city wall. This was why the Elder Devil race had brought so many low-grade devilish beasts to be used as cannon fodder. After invading the human race on so many past occasions, they had devised many effective plans to deal with the giant cities that humans had erected. In total, the 2 species of devilish beasts numbered around 30,000 to 40,000, and more than 2/3 of them were those 2-headed lizards. As for the poison devil insects, they resembled giant green silkworms and were twice the size of the 2-headed lizards, but they certainly weren't any slower. Behind these 2 types of beasts, over 100 black-armored high-grade devilish beings had appeared, and they were following along behind the beasts in an unhurried manner, as if they were supervising the beasts in battle. In the blink of an eye, the tens of thousands of beasts were less than 10 kilometers away from the human fortresses. All of a sudden, A thunderous roar rang out from among the devilish beasts, and the two-headed devilish lizards immediately sped up to an all-out sprint, while their eyes turned bright red. Meanwhile, azure light flashed from the backs of the poison devil insects, and a pair of transparent wings appeared on each of their backs. They then flapped those wings and rose up into the sky, flying along at no slower a speed than the galloping two-headed devilish lizards. The stampede of tens of thousands of devilish beasts created an extremely awe-inspiring and intimidating sight to behold, and it wouldn't be long before they covered the last few kilometers between them and the human fortresses. At the same time, there were high-grade devilish beings in the air conjuring up a burst of black chi, which transformed into a black dragon that descended into the horde of devilish beasts before abruptly exploding. All of the devilish beasts were immediately enshrouded within a vast expanse of murky black chi, and when they were less than 500 meters away from the fortresses, countless fireballs and blades of wind suddenly erupted from within the murky expanse, hurtling directly ahead toward the human fortresses. Even though the fortresses had been reinforced by restrictions, there was definitely no way that they'd be able to withstand these attacks and remain unscathed. Many of the human cultivators within the fortresses were very alarmed to see this, yet right at this moment, heavenly music suddenly began to play from the white Jade Palace above Deep Heaven City. Immediately thereafter, the golden mirror above the tallest building in the palace suddenly shuddered before blasting forth a pillar of golden light, which transformed into a golden light barrier that appeared in front of all of the fortresses. The countless oncoming fireballs and wind blades struck the layer of golden light like a torrential downpour before exploding in rapid succession, and countless white and red balls of light erupted all over the light barrier. The powers of wind and fire combined to devastating effect, causing the nearby world's origin chi to tremor violently, and it was as if heaven and earth were about to crumble. The high-grade beings from both the human and devil races looked on with grim expressions, and once all of the red and white light faded, the golden light barrier was revealed once again. In spite of how thin and fragile it appeared, it had managed to remain completely unscathed in the wake of that torrential barrage, and many of the high-grade devilish beings in the air were naturally quite surprised to see this. As for the cultivators of Deep Heaven City, they weren't very surprised by this outcome at all. Fairy Silver Light turned to Elder Gu and chuckled, "Brother Gu, your treasured sunrise mirror is becoming more and more powerful, even though it was only able to unleash such power by drawing upon the enormous spiritual power within the divine treasured palace. It's still very remarkable that just a single light barrier conjured up by the mirror was able to keep all those attacks at bay. It looks like all your efforts to refine it during the past millennium haven't gone to waste. This mirror of mine is quite a high-ranking divine spirit treasure on the chaotic myriad spirit roll to begin with, so even if I don't put a lot of effort into refining it, it should still be able to withstand this level of attacks with ease. I'm interested to see just how the Elder Devil race plans to break through this mirror's defenses," Elder Gu said with a faint smile. And Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and he couldn't help but glance up at the giant mirror behind him. At this moment, the mirror was still expelling a thick pillar of golden light, which was connected to the golden light barrier it had conjured up in the distance. Just as Han Li was appraising the mirror, all of the human cultivators in the fortresses were looking out at the sea of devilish chi up ahead. At this distance, they could already see the sinister appearances of all of the oncoming devilish beasts, and it was quite a harrowing sight to behold. Right at this moment, a cold male voice suddenly rang out within all of the human fortresses. "Attack!" All of the human cultivators reflexively made hand seals in unison upon hearing this, then brought out all of the treasures they had prepared in advance. All of a sudden, thousands of treasures were summoned at once from within the several tens of fortresses closest to the horde of devilish beasts. These treasures then came crashing down toward the oncoming devilish beasts like a barrage of shooting stars. Thunderous devilish roars rang out once again as another wave of fireballs and wind blades erupted forth in a frenzy, forming a massive wave of wind and fire that kept all of the descending treasures at bay. These devilish beasts had clearly all been trained by the high-grade devilish beings that were supervising them. Of course, the cultivators within the fortresses weren't just going to give up here. All of them immediately made hand seals and chanted incantations before frantically pointing at their respective treasures. The powers of thousands of treasures combined to form a vast expanse of dazzling light that descended with devastating force, managing to force back the enormous wave of wind and fire. However, right at this moment, several thousand green lines suddenly erupted out of the devilish chi, striking the vast expanse of light up above before exploding into clouds of green mist. An extremely abhorrent odor immediately wafted through the air, as the clouds of green mist enveloped all of the treasures without encountering any impediment. An astonishing scene then ensued. In the instant that the treasures were enshrouded within the green mist, most of them were instantly turned green, and the spiritual light radiating from them faded before they plummeted straight out of the sky. However, the remaining 200 to 300 treasures were still flying through the green mist, seemingly completely unaffected. Wait, those aren't ordinary poison devil insects. If they were, then their poison wouldn't have been able to contaminate treasures, Elder Gu exclaimed upon seeing this. Everyone else was also rather alarmed, but their expressions still remained calm. Such a minor, unexpected turn of events naturally wasn't enough to actually evoke panic within these body integration cultivators. Meanwhile, the purple-armored man standing on the giant beast-drawn carriage within the black chi up above was cackling with glee. He turned to the green-robed elderly man and said, "The humans fell for it. They really thought that these mutated devilish insects were ordinary poison devil insects. I'm sure they would have suffered heavy losses from that. It's a pity that there are so few of these mutated devilish insects, and their poison only works on low-grade treasures. Otherwise, we could have saved them as a trump card," the green-robed elderly man said with a smile, but there was also a hint of disappointment in his eyes. It's not that easy to find mutated devilish beasts. We're already very fortunate to have stumbled upon this swarm of mutated devilish insects. On top of that, these devilish beasts are just disposable pawns anyway. We'll have to be the ones to truly conquer this city," the purple-armored man said with a nonchalant chuckle. "That's true, but having said that, these mutated devilish insects should be somewhat effective against formations and restrictions as well. Perhaps they'll give us an even bigger pleasant surprise later," the green-robed elderly man said with an expectant nod. "That's certainly a possibility." The purple-armored man also cast his gaze toward the fortresses in the distance with a hopeful expression. After losing their spiritual connections with their treasures, the human cultivators in the fortresses naturally didn't dare to unleash any more treasures to attack the enemies. Instead, they were all instructed by their core formation stage leader to stand on the formations that had already been engraved onto the ground of each of the fortresses. They then flipped their hands over to reveal a formation plate each, and with the support of this core formation cultivator, they began to chant incantations and inject their magic power into their formation plates in a frenzy. Meanwhile, the core formation cultivator himself made a series of hand seals before slowly closing his eyes. In the blink of an eye, the formations beneath all of the cultivators began to emit a dull buzzing sound, and a ball of silver light emerged at the center of each formation. These balls of light then began to rapidly rotate, while the giant wave of fire and wind unleashed by the two-headed devilish lizards forced back the remaining treasures before crashing into the golden light barrier. At the same time, thousands of jets of green liquid were also hurtling directly toward the light barrier. The golden light barrier was able to remain strong and resolute in the face of the explosions, but they began to flash erratically in response to the corrosion of the green clouds of mist. The process was very slow, but the light barrier's power was definitely being chipped away at a steady rate. However, right at this moment, the formations within the fortresses were finally completely activated, and all of the silver balls of light instantly vanished from the centers of the formations. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted in the air several hundred feet above the fortresses, and the silver balls of light emerged before unleashing bolts of silver lightning that intertwined to form a massive lightning net that descended from above. Regardless of whether it was fireballs, wind blades, or green poison mist, everything was instantly vanquished into oblivion upon coming into contact with the lightning net, which then transformed into countless silver snakes that descended into the devilish chi. A thunderous rumbling boom rang out as the devilish chi and silver lightning intertwined before exploding violently. The two types of devilish beasts down below desperately attempted to evade these bolts of silver lightning, but many of them were still instantly reduced to ashes. On top of that, there were just as many devilish beasts that were killed or injured by the shockwaves from the explosions of the bolts of silver lightning as those that were actually struck by the lightning, and countless devilish beasts were felled amid strings of agonized howls. Meanwhile, the remaining devilish beasts were still unleashing one wave of attacks after another with single-minded ferocity, but they were unable to destroy the golden light barrier in a short time. To further compound their woes, the silver bolts of lightning being released by the balls of silver light were only becoming more and more powerful, and close to half of this initial wave of devilish beasts were killed in the blink of an eye. A furious look appeared on the purple-armored man's face upon seeing this, and he immediately waved a hand through the air. Two of the small flags hovering before him were instantly drawn into his grasp, and he rubbed them viciously between his hands, reducing them to two plumes of smoke. Close to half of the remaining small flags then began to tremor slightly at his behest, and white light suddenly flashed from the bodies of the two giant white snails in the army of devilish beasts. Immediately thereafter, they raised huge feelers to the heavens and let loose a thunderous cry that was akin to the moo of a cow. Two pillars of white light erupted from their mouths, then struck the golden light barrier with devastating force. The resolute light barrier instantly began to ripple violently, and in the next instant it shuddered before being completely pierced through by the pillars of light. The dozen or so fortresses behind the light barrier, as well as the human cultivators within them, were all reduced to dust by the pillars of light in the blink of an eye. Not only that, but a stir immediately ran through the enormous devilish army in the distance, and they all let loose bloodthirsty roars as they galloped toward Deep Heaven City. At the same time, spiritual light flashed from the bodies of the devilish beings in the air above, and they also began to advance while releasing balls of black light or clouds of devilish chi, creating a very intimidating sight to behold. Loud drumming rang out from within the devilish chi even higher up in the air, and over 100 glossy black flying carriages flew out. There were several armored high-grade devilish beings standing on each carriage, and all of them were wielding long halberds with vicious looks on their faces. A sharp, shrill cry suddenly sounded, and another giant flying carriage that was over 1,000 feet emerged behind these flying carriages. The giant carriage was being drawn by two massive purple beasts that bore a strong resemblance to rhinoceroses, but each had a shimmering golden horn. There were hundreds of armored guards standing on the giant carriage, and at its very center stood the purple-armored devilish being and the green-robed elderly man, both of whom wore cold expressions. After throwing a series of jabs, the elder devil race was finally beginning its true attack. All of the elders' brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. The number of elite devilish beings that had appeared was far less than they had anticipated compared to how ferocious the first wave of attacks from previous devilish tribulations had been said to be. These devilish beasts were indeed quite powerful, but they were dreaming if they thought they could conquer Deep Heaven City on their own. In the face of the countless silver lightning snakes descending from the heavens, the army of devilish beasts continued to charge ahead without any regard for the casualties they were suffering. After reaching the golden light barrier, they either unleashed their innate offensive abilities or used their own powerful bodies as battering rams. Meanwhile, the devilish beings up above were busy controlling their devilish treasures, conjuring up all types of devilish clouds to keep as much of the lightning at bay as possible. As for the flying carriages carrying the armored devilish warriors, they stopped close to 10 kilometers away from the light barrier before unleashing attacks with their weapons from afar. Streaks of black light erupted from the flying carriages and hurtled directly toward the golden light barrier, as an incessant string of rumbling booms shook the entire heavens. And Li heaved a faint sigh before turning to Buddhist monk Jin Yue and the others with slightly furrowed brows. Fellow Taoists, it looks like this is just a jab thrown by the elder devil race to test out our city's defenses, so I'm going to go back for now. I'm currently at a critical juncture in the refinement of one of my treasures, and once I complete the process, it should be very helpful in the defense against the elder devil race. Indeed, this first wave of attacks is far less fearsome than we had expected. It seems we overreacted due to the past tales that we had heard. If you have something important you need to attend to, then go ahead, fellow Taoist Han. It looks like the elder devil race is settling in for a prolonged battle, so body integration cultivators like us most likely won't need to do anything in the immediate future, Buddhist monk Jin Yue sighed as he nodded in response. If the elder devil race had attacked our city with everything they had from the beginning, then I would feel less uneasy instead. We'll have to be on our guard in this current situation. We are the most powerful beings in the city, but we all have matters that we need to attend to as well, so we can't just stand around like this. How about this? Unless the elder devil race launches an all-out attack, we'll guard this place two at a time. Fellow Taoist Han, you're not part of the panel of elders, and you're not very familiar with the defenses we've set up in the city, so you won't need to be part of this rotation. However, if the city falls into a truly perilous situation, then I hope you will lend us your assistance, Elder Gu said in a meaningful voice. That's a great idea, Brother Gu. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. I have no objections to this either. Everyone nodded in agreement with this proposal, including Han Li. Thus, Han Li cupped his fist in a parting salute before flying away as a streak of azure light. Everyone else also departed soon thereafter, leaving only the burly black-robed man and Elder Gu to stand on guard duty. Brother Gu, are we going to just keep standing by and watching like this? Isn't that too passive? It's taking a vast amount of spirit stones to support the treasured sunrise mirror in the face of such fierce attacks, the black-robed man said in a cold voice. HMPH, rest assured, fellow Taoist bow, seeing as these devilish beings are throwing these devilish beasts at us as cannon fodder to test our defenses, then I certainly can't disappoint them. We'll use the 7-star flame essence formation to teach them a lesson, Elder Gu replied as a cold look flashed through his eyes. The black-robed man was quite taken aback by this, and he asked in a hesitant voice, the 7-star flame essence formation, that's one of the city's trump cards. Is it really a good idea to reveal it so early? It's all right, I'll only activate 10% of the formation's power. In doing so, we'll be able to teach those devilish beings a lesson, but still keep the true power of the formation a secret. Perhaps it'll lure the high-grade devilish beings into a false sense of security and benefit us later on, Elder Gu said in a confident manner. After contemplating this notion for a moment, the black-robed man also felt this to be a sound plan, so he nodded in agreement. That does make sense. We'll do as you say then, Brother Gu. Thus, having reached a consensus, they immediately issued the order without any delay. Within an underground secret chamber beneath a giant crimson tower in Deep Heaven City, there were 7 elderly men in crimson robes seated around a golden formation with their eyes closed. Judging from the fire attribute spiritual chi emanating from their bodies, all 7 of them were fire attribute cultivators, and the spiritual pressure they were releasing suggested that they were all at the spatial tempering stage. The sound of a bell chime suddenly rang out from the body of what appeared to be the eldest member of the group, and he immediately opened his eyes, revealing a pair of crimson pupils that seemed to have flames surging within them. He flipped a hand over to produce a white disc, then quickly glanced down at it before instructing, activate the formation, but only unleash 10% of its power. The other 6 elderly men immediately opened their eyes and answered in unison, yes. All 7 of them made hand seals as bright crimson light erupted from their bodies. They then each laid a hand onto the back of their own heads, and 7 crimson nascent souls emerged in quick succession. The 7 nascent souls had facial features that were identical to the 7 men, and they were each holding a shimmering red treasure, which consisted of a ring, a flag, a sword, a saber, a pagoda, a badge, and a bead. There was red light swirling around the surfaces of these treasures, and they were releasing scorching waves of heat, clearly indicating that they were extremely pure fire attribute treasures. The 7 nascent souls began to chant incantations, and the 7 fire attribute treasures quickly swelled to several times their original size, then slowly drifted toward the center of the formation. Han Li was on his way back to his cave abode when he suddenly stopped in his tracks, then turned back to look into the distance with a bewildered expression. In the air above Deep Heaven City, 7 massive crimson stars had suddenly emerged, tainting the entire heavens a fiery crimson color. Even through the layers of restrictions that enshrouded Deep Heaven City, he could still sense wisps of a scorching aura. All of the guards in the city, as well as the normal cultivators who were meditating in their abodes, naturally also rushed out to appraise this phenomenon with astonishment in their eyes. As a body integration cultivator, Han Li was able to sense far more than other cultivators with his spiritual sense, and as he looked into the distance, a rare hint of wariness flashed through his eyes. He could sense that these 7 crimson stars were imbued with enormous powers of laws that were capable of severely wounding or even killing him, so how could he not be alarmed? Right at this moment, red light suddenly swirled over the surfaces of the 7 stars, following which an extremely profound and massive formation emerged in midair with the 7 stars at its center. The formation was of a fiery red color and encompassed close to half of Deep Heaven City. Immediately thereafter, the powers of laws of heaven and earth rippled violently, following which all 7 of the stars abruptly blurred before transforming into a massive fire-raven projection that swooped down from the heavens amid a clear cry. An earth-shattering boom erupted, and tremors ran through the entirety of Deep Heaven City. A crimson mushroom cloud then rose up from beyond the city wall, swelling to over 100,000 feet tall. Even from this far away, Han Li could still clearly see the devastating mushroom cloud, and it created quite an awe-inspiring sight to behold. The scorching flames from the mushroom cloud were kept at bay by the golden light barrier, and it was as if 2 different worlds had appeared on either side of the barrier. On one side, everything remained completely unchanged, while the other side had been completely transformed into a sea of flames. The waves of fire surging out from the mushroom cloud stretched for hundreds of kilometers, and all of the devilish beasts swept up by the flames were instantly reduced to ashes without being able to offer any resistance. As for those devilish humans, they were naturally able to resist somewhat with their devilish treasures to protect them, but there wasn't enough time for them to escape an attack that covered such a vast area, and they were also quickly incinerated amid blood-curdling cries of agony. Meanwhile, a layer of dense spiritual light instantly appeared over the bodies of the 5 gargantuan devilish beasts to keep the flames at bay. But it was quite clear that they wouldn't be able to last long in the face of such fearsomely high temperatures, either. The giant black devilish bird quickly rose up into the air, and with just a single flap of its wings, it transformed into a ball of black light that flew back to several tens of kilometers away. After just a few more flashes, it had escaped outside the range of the entire sea of flames at an incredible speed. The giant crimson ape stomped both of its feet violently into the ground, propelling itself up into the air like a reverse shooting star. It then transformed into a gust of fierce wind that swept away into the distance, forcibly parting all of the flames in its path. Even though it was slightly slower than the black devilish bird, it wasn't far behind and quickly escaped from the sea of flames as well. As for the 2 white snails and 3-headed purple python, they were clearly far more maladroit and were nowhere near as lucky. Even though they were also traveling as quickly as they could, they only managed to cover several hundred kilometers of ground before the protective spiritual light around their bodies gave out, and they were also swept up by the flames amid thunderous howls of anguish. Not long after the fall of these 3 gargantuan devilish beasts, 2 streaks of light, one purple and one green, rushed out of the sea of fire, then continued to fly away without any pause and only stopped after flying for close to 10,000 kilometers away. These were none other than the purple-armored man and the green-robed elderly man. As a pair of body integration stage devilish beings, they were able to escape with their lives despite that horrific attack. However, judging from their charred clothes and singed hair, it was quite clear that it had been a very close call for them as well. They turned back and cast their eyes toward the sea of flames with expressions of thunderous fury. The purple-armored man spat through gritted teeth. "I didn't think that the humans would use this kind of attack against us. They sure do think highly of us." Indeed, that was quite unexpected. The humans normally wouldn't use this type of trump card against mere devilish beasts. An enormous amount of spiritual power would be required to unleash such an attack. Have they really gathered that many spirit stones, or is the leader of the human cultivators in this city just a madman? The green-robed elderly man also murmured with his brows tightly furrowed. HMPH, who cares if the leader of the human cultivators has gone mad or not? The issue at hand is that all of the devilish beasts we brought with us have perished here, with the exception of those 2 giant devilish beasts. We're definitely going to be punished for this. The purple-armored man sighed in a resigned manner. That may not necessarily be the case. The mission we were assigned is to test out this city's defenses and try to provoke the most powerful attacks possible. We managed to goad them into unleashing such a fearsome retaliative attack against us, so we've completed our mission with flying colors. As such, I'm sure that even if we do get punished, it won't be a very severe punishment, the green-robed elderly man countered in a calm manner. I certainly hope so. Thank heavens we didn't bring any of our race's elite troops with us. Otherwise, our losses would have been far more severe, the purple-armored man said with a wry smile. There's no need to be so depressed, Lord Shi. Our army was only wiped out as we were completely unfamiliar with what defensive measures the humans had prepared. When we return, we definitely won't fall for the same thing again, the green-robed elderly man consoled. Indeed, if I'm given another opportunity, I'm definitely going to exact my vengeance. I haven't been reduced to such a sorry state for a very long time. For now, let's go back and report our findings. The purple-armored man cast one final resentful glance at Deep Heaven City before flying away again, not waiting for a response from the elderly man. The green-robed elderly man also cast a frosty glance at Deep Heaven City before giving a cold chuckle and flying away as well. As for the two giant devilish beasts that had also managed to escape, they had been extremely alarmed by their near-death ordeal and continued to fly away in a blind panic even after emerging from the sea of flames. In the blink of an eye, peace and quiet had returned to the area. However, no one had noticed that on a mountain over several hundred kilometers away, there was a translucent crystal ball hovering high up in the air while incessantly flashing with faint spiritual light. At the same time, in one of the giant pyramids in a devilish city countless kilometers away, there were over 20 high-grade devilish beings seated in 2 rows on either side of a hall. At the end of the hall was an inky black chair, upon which sat a crimson-robed middle-aged man. The man had a very graceful and handsome appearance, and he appeared to be completely identical to a normal human. At the center of the hall was a head-sized crystal ball that was hovering in midair, and it was extremely similar in size and appearance to the one near Deep Heaven City. Within the crystal ball, the images of the sea of flames raging in front of Deep Heaven City were being depicted. Everyone's attention was focused on the scenes unfolding within the crystal ball, and the crimson-robed man remained completely expressionless, so it was impossible to tell what he was thinking, but all of the other high-grade devilish beings wore different expressions. Sacred Ancestor, Lord Shi and fellow Taoist Lu are truly useless. They lost all of their troops to a mere restriction. We must punish them severely when they get back. A handsome man with a short corkscrew horn on his head suddenly said in a cold voice. You're being too harsh, Brother Ban. Fellow Taoist Shi and fellow Taoist Lu haven't made any errors. Even if we had led that army in person, the result would have still been the same. No one could have envisioned that the humans would retaliate in such a fierce manner. In any case, we managed to goad the humans into revealing one of their trump cards, and all it cost us were some low-grade devilish beasts. If you ask me, they should be rewarded for their efforts instead. A devilish man with a near-transparent face countered. Afraid I can't agree with you there, Lord Chuan. Even though those low-grade devilish beasts are nothing more than cannon fodder, losing so many at once is still quite a heavy blow for us. On top of that, there were 3 rare giant devilish beasts that perished alongside them as well, and they hadn't served any purpose before they were killed. If no punishment is given for something like this, then it would set a very bad example, the man with the short horn said with a hint of cold mockery in his eyes. HMPH, are you saying that you would have been able to do better, Brother Ban? We all know that you and fellow Taoists Shi are sworn enemies. Who knows if you're proposing a punishment for them for your own personal gain? The devilish man with the transparent face chuckled coldly in response. It was quite clear that they weren't on good terms with one another, and all of the other high-grade devilish beings were displaying different reactions to their fiery exchange. Some remained expressionless and merely ignored their argument, some sighed with furrowed brows, and some looked on with their intrigued smiles on their faces. Of course, there were also several other high-grade devilish beings who joined in on the debate, and the hall was quickly plunged into a chaotic state. That's enough, the crimson-robed man on the black chair yelled in an expressionless manner. All of the arguing voices in the hall immediately died down, and the devilish beings who had participated in the argument immediately extended respectful bows toward the crimson-robed man before falling silent. I'll see to those two in person when they get back. I gathered all of you here to appraise the defenses of this Deep Heaven City and to devise a strategy to conquer the city as quickly as possible. The other armies have all been mobilized now, and I don't want to fall behind the others, the crimson-robed man said in a cold voice. As long as we can conquer this city as quickly as possible, losing some devilish beasts isn't a big deal. We have countless devilish beasts at our disposal and can replenish our armies at any time. Does anyone have anything to add to the method that Elder Hugh and you proposed? The crimson-robed man asked in a cold voice. Sacred Ancestor, I suggest we send out some elite devilish beings to eradicate some of the smaller human cultivator strongholds in this area while we attack Deep Heaven City. That way, we won't have to worry about watching our backs when we launch the final attack. On top of that, we can use this opportunity to familiarize our elite troops with the way that human cultivators like to do battle, which should minimize our casualties during the final attack, a graceful yellow-robed woman suggested. The crimson-robed man was rather intrigued by this idea, and he asked, roughly how many other large human settlements are there in the nearby area? A high-grade devilish being with the appearance of a fair-skinned young man replied, "We haven't had much time to scout the area yet, but from what we've seen thus far, there are approximately 7 or 8 human settlements nearby. However, none of them are even close to the scale of Deep Heaven City." After a brief pause for contemplation, the crimson-robed man decided, "In that case, send the Jade War Devils, bloodlight crystal guards, and the all-encompassing devilish cavaliers to wipe out those settlements. As for everything else, follow the plan outlined by Elder Hu and Yu." "What? You're planning to deploy the bloodlight crystal guards? There's no problem with deploying the Jade War Devils and the all-encompassing devilish cavaliers, but the bloodlight crystal guards are your personal guards. It would not be wise to send them away, sacred ancestor." Most of the high-grade devilish beings' expressions changed drastically upon hearing this order, and some of them immediately raised objections. "I have my own reason for deploying the bloodlight crystal guards. There's no need for any of you to try to dissuade me," the crimson-robed man said in an implacable voice. The high-grade devilish beings present exchanged a few glances upon hearing this, and didn't dare to say anything further. Right at this moment, the crimson-robed man raised his head, and he seemed to cast his gaze through the ceiling of the hall toward an extremely distant place. Meanwhile, on a giant mountain near the spirit's sovereign city, there was an elegant woman with a pair of pristine white horns on her head standing on a huge rock. She also withdrew her gaze from a certain direction, and a hint of disdain flashed through her eyes. There were 50 to 60 high-grade devilish beings standing behind her, and all of them had their hands hanging by their sides, looking down from the mountain summit with solemn expressions. There was a sea of devilish chi down below, within which there were countless armored devilish warriors and giant flags that stretched as far as the eye could see. There were also many types of unheard of high-grade devilish beasts intermingled among the armored warriors, and they would let loose the occasional vicious snarl. Up ahead, the spirit's sovereign city had been completely surrounded by the devilish army. In contrast with what was happening at Deep Heaven City, the devilish army here had deployed all of their troops from the get-go, and it seemed that they were planning to conquer the spirit's sovereign city in one fell swoop. In the distance, the spirit's sovereign city was enshrouded within layers of green light barriers, and there were rows of human cultivators standing atop the city wall. The remains of tens of thousands of fortresses lay around the spirit's sovereign city, and it seemed that they had been destroyed by some type of overwhelming power. "Begin the attack," the horned woman commanded, and the killing intent in her voice completely belied her gorgeous appearance. "Yes, Mistress Liu Jai." The 50 to 60 high-grade devilish beings didn't even dare to look directly at her as they bowed in unison, and a burst of astonishing baleful chi erupted into the heavens from the summit of the massive mountain. At the very edge of the group of high-grade devilish beings stood a devilish woman in a purple palatial dress. She raised her head slightly to reveal a set of peerlessly beautiful features, and even though she also wore a respectful expression toward the horned woman as all of the other high-grade devilish beings did, there was a hint of complex emotion deep within her eyes. After getting back to his abode, Han Li immediately returned to the secret chamber on the top floor to continue refining the golden gourd and the myriad sword artwork. If he could refine these two treasures before the true battle against the elder devil race began, then he and his disciples would all be better equipped for the upcoming battle. A month later, Han Li completed the refinement of the gourd and bestowed the treasure upon Hai Yueshan. After that, he focused the entirety of his attention on refining the myriad sword artwork. Thus, time passed by one day after another, and over half a year flew by in the blink of an eye. During this time, no messengers were sent to Han Li by the elders of Deep Heaven City. However, his disciples were keeping him up to date on the current situation, so he knew that the elder devil race had virtually never ceased their attacks against Deep Heaven City. Regardless of how many devilish beings were slain, a new army would turn up in front of the city in a few days. It was as if there were no end to their numbers. Furthermore, the high-grade devilish beings leading these devilish beasts paid no heed whatsoever to the number of casualties suffered. The city had unleashed several types of super formation to almost decimate those high-grade devilish beings on several occasions, but they were completely fearless and would quickly return with another devilish army. What was even more concerning was that, during the past few months, the human settlements closest to Deep Heaven City had been breached one after another. Most of the human cultivators in those settlements perished in battle, while a small proportion of them were captured and were to be transformed into devilish humans through injections of devilish chi. As for the human mortals, they were all spared by the devilish armies and were allowed to continue living in the settlements. According to reports, the devilish beings that attacked these settlements were true devilish elites rather than armies of low-grade devilish beasts. Not only were they all individually extremely powerful, they were also very proficient in combination techniques, and even the body integration cultivators in these settlements hadn't been able to survive the attacks. Han Li was naturally quite alarmed to hear this. It seemed that the true power of the elder devil race was far more fearsome than the rumors suggested. If they were to sweep through all of the human settlements in the nearby area, then find a chink in the defenses of Deep Heaven City, it would really be difficult to say if the city would be able to keep them at bay. However, this wasn't a situation that he could change on his own. He would just have to rely on the panel of elders to address this perilous situation. All of the Deep Heaven City elders had lived for over 10,000 years, so they definitely weren't just going to surrender and wait for death. Han Li had a feeling that these days during which he could refine his treasures in peace were numbered. Sure enough, a month later, Han Li received a message from Buddhist monk Jin Yue, inviting him to discuss some matters with the panel of elders. Han Li naturally, immediately set off to meet with the elders of the city. Less than half a day later, Han Li found himself seated in a chair within a certain hall. Aside from the elders that Han Li had met before, there were also several other unfamiliar body integration cultivators in the hall, and they were clearly the members of the panel of elders that he had yet to meet. It was said that these elders all had important matters to attend to recently, which was why Han Li had never met them. Han Li was rather curious about what these supposed important matters were, but he naturally knew better than to pry and merely exchanged some small talk with these elders. All of these elders were at the early body integration stage, so they were naturally very polite toward the mid-body integration stage Han Li. However, during their conversation, Han Li noticed that Elder Gu and the others all seemed to be quite concerned about something. All right, now that you've all met Brother Han, let's get straight into our discussion. Yesterday, the panel of elders received news that the Elder Devil race has deployed an army to attack the joint city of the four major sects. The four sects know that they won't be able to withstand this attack, so they sent out a suicide squad of messengers to request for reinforcements from our Deep Heaven City. The stronghold of the four major sects is an important human settlement that's second in scale only to our city, so if that stronghold is conquered by the devilish army, then we'll truly be on our own. Hence, we have to send out reinforcements, Elder Gu said in a grim voice. Buddhist monk Jin Yue and the others also adopted solemn expressions upon seeing this, and Han Li's brows furrowed slightly, while looks of surprise appeared on the faces of the new elders. It seemed that they had only just been made aware of this news as well. Brother Gu, didn't the heavenly insect manage to force the elder devil race into retreat on several occasions, and even severely wounded a few high-grade devilish beings? How did the situation deteriorate so quickly? An elder with a red complexion asked in an urgent voice. The four major sects combined form an extremely powerful force to be reckoned with, and the heavenly city they erected may be lacking in defensive prowess compared with our Deep Heaven City, but it definitely won't be lacking by much. Reason why the situation suddenly deteriorated is because the Elder Devil race suddenly deployed over 10 high-grade devilish beings at once to attack the city, then tricked the Grand Elders of the four major sects into coming out of the city before unleashing a sneak attack. As a result, 2 of the Grand Elders were killed, thereby severely denting the top-end offensive prowess of the four major sects, so they're naturally in a very perilous situation, Elder Gu explained in a grim manner. I see. I presume you've gathered all of us here to discuss how we should reinforce them, then, the red-faced elder said with a nod. Indeed, Heavenly City is the only major human settlement near our city, so we have to save it. The city was able to survive the entirety of the last devilish tribulation, and on this occasion, all they actually require are a few high-grade cultivators to replenish the grand elders they've lost, Elder Gu sighed. So what you're suggesting is that all we need to send out are few body integration stage cultivators, Buddhist monk Jin Yue mused with a contemplative look in his eyes. That's exactly what I'm thinking. After all, our Deep Heaven City is the ultimate target for the devilish army. It's necessary for us to save Heavenly City, but at the same time, we have to make sure we don't fall into a trap where too much of our forces are diverted away to reinforce them. Heavenly City isn't lacking in low-grade and mid-grade disciples, and the city itself also possesses powerful defensive prowess. All we have to do is send over 2 or 3 body integration cultivators to reinforce them. That way, we'll be able to help them tide over this perilous situation, while also ensuring that we're not weakening our own forces too much, Elder Gu replied, having clearly thought extensively about this matter in advance. After hearing Elder Gu's proposal, all of the elders naturally began to discuss their options. But in the end, it was decided that Elder Gu's proposed course of action was the most feasible one. However, all of the elders then began to argue about who was going to be sent to reinforce Heavenly and City. You want me and fellow Taoist you to go and reinforce them. I don't think that's a good idea. It's not that I'm unwilling to take the risk. As you know, I'm currently overseeing a very important matter, and I can't leave at a crucial juncture like this, a white-haired middle-aged man said with furrowed brows. Elder Gu had just suggested for him and another elder to go and reinforce Heavenly and City, and he had refused without any hesitation. I'm sure you know what I've been up to, Brother Gu. My celestial fragrance pills are also at a crucial stage in their refinement, and if I leave now, all my prior efforts will go to waste. Another elder, presumably Elder Yu, also refused with a shake of his head. Then what about Brother Qin and Brother Lei? Elder Gu turned toward another pair of elders with furrowed brows. Reluctant expression appeared on both of those elders' faces in response. I'm afraid we've hit a dead end then. Fellow Taoist Jin Yue, myself, and the others are responsible for overseeing the defense of Deep Heaven City, so we certainly can't leave, Elder Gu said as a displeased look appeared on his face. I'm willing to make the trip, Brother Gu. I'm good friends with Fairy Lin of the Heavenly Sovereign Sect, so I would be happy to lend them my assistance, Fairy Silver Light suddenly said. Letter 1D4 BB letter 1D4 5F letter 212F letter 212F letter 1D4 64 letter 1D4 52 letter 1D4 4F. Letter 1D4 B8 letter 1D4 5C letter 1D6 2E. That would be great. I'm sure you'll be welcomed with open arms there. However, it won't be enough to send you on your own. We have to at least send another person with you. Elder Gu was given a massive pleasant surprise by Fairy Silver Light's decision to volunteer herself, and he reflexively cast his gaze toward Han Li as he spoke. Han Li heaved an internal sigh upon seeing this. He knew that he most likely wouldn't be able to escape this task, so he also volunteered himself. I'm also willing to make a trip to Heavenly and City. Ever since I came to Deep Heaven City, I still haven't done anything, and this would be a chance for me to make myself useful. You have my thanks, Brother Han. You're a mid-body integration cultivator, and you once fought on equal footing with a late-body integration cultivator, so I'm sure Heavenly and City's troubles will soon be no more with your assistance. Elder Gu was very elated that Han Li had also stepped up to accept the task. Han Li smiled and replied, Heavenly and City is a very important human settlement, so it's only right that I do my part to help it in its time of need. The situation sounds quite urgent, so how about fellow Taoist Silver Light and I set off tomorrow? Even though he was going to have to directly face high-grade devilish beings during this trip to Heavenly and City, no devilish beings aside from sacred ancestors would be able to pose any threat to the current Han Li, so even though he knew there would be some risk involved, there was no fear in his heart. That would be best. However, the Elder Devil race has already cut off long-distance teleportation, and the teleportation formations in the city won't be able to take the two of you directly to Heavenly and City, so we can only send you to the secret teleportation site located the closest to there. From there, you'll have to fly the rest of the way to the city, Buddhist monk Jin Yue said in an apologetic manner. That's all right with Brother Han and my abilities. I'm sure the remaining portion of the journey won't delay us too much, Fairy Silver Light said in a nonchalant manner, and Han Li didn't see this as a problem either. Thus, having made those arrangements, all of the other elders were quite relieved, and they began to discuss strategies to counter the Elder Devil race's attacks, which were only becoming fiercer and fiercer. However, despite the elders' vast wealths of knowledge and experience, they were completely stumped by these armies of countless low-grade devilish beasts. Even though Deep Heaven City had prepared an astonishing supply of spirit stones, more than 10% of this supply had been exhausted by the countless formations that were set up around the city. This didn't seem to be much of an issue until one considered that, according to past conventions, a devilish tribulation would generally last over 100 years. Less than a year had passed since the commencement of this devilish tribulation, so how could the elders not be concerned? And Li suddenly smiled and said, There's no need to be overly concerned about this, fellow Taoists. Even if there really are virtually infinite low-grade devilish beasts in the Elder Devil realm, I'm sure it'll require a lot of effort and resources for the Elder Devil race to search for and tame these beasts. On top of that, it definitely won't be a simple matter for them to bring these devilish beasts into our spirit realm. After all, even though the resistance from the power of our realm has abated significantly, some of it still remains, and it has to be an extremely great burden for the Elder Devil race to transport so many low-grade devilish beasts between realms. Otherwise, they would simply overwhelm us from the get-go rather than go through all this effort to test out our defenses. We're naturally aware of this, but this devilish tribulation is truly more fierce than we anticipated, and we don't know if the resources in our deep heaven city will last, Elder Gu said with a wry smile. Compared to the armies of devilish beasts and the high-grade devilish beings that have already appeared, I'm more concerned about just how many of the Elder Devil race's sacred ancestors will be able to descend into our realm, Fairy Silver Light said in a grim voice. What do you mean by that, Fairy Silver Light? Han Li asked. In past, once the devilish tribulations have reached approximately the halfway mark, the power of our realm will no longer be able to prevent the true bodies of the sacred ancestors from descending into the spirit realm. But for some reason, only a few of them are able to descend into our realm each devilish tribulation. In the past, we were able to keep these sacred ancestors at bay by joining forces with the other grand ascension stage beings of the nearby foreign races. But seeing as this devilish tribulation is far more perilous than previous ones, the number of sacred ancestors that descend into our realm could quite possibly be increased as well. There doesn't have to be too many. If more than 10 sacred ancestors appear in our realm at once, then our human and demon races will definitely be crushed, Fairy Silver Light explained. Elder Gu wasn't surprised by Fairy Silver Light's words at all. Instead, a cold light flashed through his eyes as he said, "Fellow Taoist Jin Yue and I have actually developed theories in the past about why this is the case, but the Holy Island should have set up countermeasures for such a scenario. All we have to do is prepare as best as we can." Fairy Silver Light's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and after a brief pause she said, "That's true. The Holy Island has many individuals of vast wisdom from our two races. Seeing as they were able to predict that this devilish tribulation would be different from previous ones, I'm sure they've prepared measures to address the situation. In that case, I'll be taking my leave now so I can prepare for the trip to Heavenly City tomorrow." Elder Gu and the others naturally all agreed to this arrangement. Not long after she left, Han Li also took his leave, citing the same alibi. Less than half a day later, Han Li returned to his cave abode before immediately summoning Hai Yueshan and Qi Lingzi. After bestowing upon them some treasures and pills, and giving them some further instructions, he returned to the top floor to meditate. This trip most likely wasn't going to be a very perilous one for him, but it would naturally still be best for him to ensure that he was in prime condition before setting off. The next morning, Han Li flew toward the hall where Deep Heaven City's teleportation formations were situated. Several hours later, he was greeted by the sight of a white-robed woman wearing a mask standing outside the hall. Han Li landed beside her before cupping his fist in a salute. "Sorry to keep you waiting, fellow Taoist." "Not at all, Brother Han. I only just got here as well. Let's set off," Fairy Silver Light replied in an indifferent manner. Thus, the two of them made their way into the hall, where several guards were already waiting for them. As soon as they entered the hall, the guards immediately extended respectful salutes toward them, and their leader said, "We've already prepared the teleportation formation, and the place you'll be teleported to will be around a month's travel away from Heavenly City. In order to keep that teleportation site a secret, it hasn't been used ever since the commencement of the devilish tribulation, so please do take care in case the teleportation site has already been exposed." "Are you saying we could be teleporting straight into an ambush from the Elder Devil race?" Fairy Silver Light asked in a cold voice as she raised an eyebrow. The guard's heart jolted upon hearing this, and he hurriedly explained, "The location of the teleportation site is extremely secretive, so that shouldn't be the case. I'm only stating a very unlikely hypothetical situation." "There's nothing wrong with the teleportation formation, is there?" Han Li asked in a calm voice. "Definitely not. We've just tested it not too long ago," the guard replied in a confident manner. "As long as the teleportation formation is fine, even if there's an ambush on the other side, fellow Taoist Silver Light and I will be able to take care of ourselves. Prepare the teleportation formation right away," Han Li instructed. Fairy Silver Light opened her mouth to say something in response, but decided against it in the end. Thus, the guards immediately sprang into action, and hurriedly began to activate the teleportation formation. Very silver light strode onto the center of the formation first, and Han Li followed along with a calm smile. Moments later, a buzzing sound rang out from the teleportation formation underfoot, and white spiritual light flashed around them. The spiritual light then brightened even further, and the two of them vanished on the spot. From Han Li's perspective, everything around him had abruptly turned blurry and indistinct. With his current level of powers, teleportation over a distance like this would only result in very minor discomfort. As the light around them began to fade, and a new set of scenery took shape around them, Han Li immediately released his spiritual sense to scour through the surrounding area, following which a cold light instantly flashed through his eyes. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D4 2B, letter 1D5 56, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D6 04, letter 1D6 AT. Letter 1D5 54, letter 1D5 60, letter 1D4 6. Almost at the exact same moment, hundreds of streaks of black light came hurtling toward them from all sides. Han Li immediately made a hand seal to conjure up a layer of gray light around his own body. Initially, the layer of gray light was only around 10 feet thick, but after just a single flash, it swelled drastically to countless times its original size, encompassing all of the oncoming streaks of black light in the process. As a result, all of the streaks of light came to an abrupt halt and were revealed to be black crossbow arrows, each of which was around a foot in length and of a glossy black color. The tips of the arrows were flashing with a sinister purple light, and they seemed to have been smeared with some kind of lethal poison. Only then did Han Li inspect his surroundings in an unhurried manner, and in doing so, he discovered that they were currently situated in a giant hall that was over 1,000 feet in size. There were 50 to 60 black-armored devilish warriors dispersed throughout the hall, and they were all holding black crossbows while staring at Han Li's duo in a shocked manner. Most of these devilish beings were at the core formation stage, and there was a small number of nascent soul stage beings among them, but they were led by a deity transformation stage devilish being with coarse skin and a single horn on his head. All of a sudden, the deity transformation stage devilish being screeched, "Retreat! Those are body integration stage human beings." As soon as his voice trailed off, a dull thump rang out from this body, and a burst of dense devilish chi erupted forth, permeating throughout the entire hall. He then immediately fled toward the entrance of the hall as a streak of black light, with this devilish chi acting as a smokescreen. The other armored devilish warriors naturally also attempted to flee the scene in a blind panic, but Han Li certainly wasn't going to let them get away. A hint of killing intent appeared in his eyes, and the gray light around him suddenly flashed, following which the black crossbow arrows that were hovering in midair immediately flew back the same way they had come from, and they did so at over 10 times the speed they had initially been launched. A string of anguished cries rang out from the surrounding devilish beings, and all of them quickly fell to the ground. Immediately thereafter, countless thin gray threads emerged from within the gray light and shredded the bodies of these devilish beings, eradicating even their nascent souls in the process. Han Li then turned toward the leader of the devilish beings with a cold look in his eyes. At this point, he had already fled to the entrance, and Han Li's hand shot forth like lightning before making a grabbing motion from afar. A huge azure hand instantly took shape in the air above the devilish being before crashing down with devastating force, crushing the devilish being into mincemeat amid a blood-curdling cry. Only then did Han Li sweep a sleeve through the air, and all of the gray threads of the giant azure hand vanished on the spot. After that, he turned to fairy silver light and said, "It looks like this place was indeed discovered by the elder devil race, but they don't seem to have focused too much attention on this place, considering the caliber of the devilish beings they left here to stand on guard. It's not that they don't want to station more powerful beings here. It's just that our human race has set up too many of these secret teleportation sites, so there's no way the elder devil race can station powerful beings at every single one. The fact that there was a deity transformation stage devilish being here shows that they've already taken this place very seriously," Fairy Silver Light replied. "I see," Han Li said as he nodded with an enlightened look in his eyes. He then flicked a finger, and a fireball shot forth before transforming into a crimson fire raven in a flash. The fire raven then swooped down onto the ground, reducing all of the bodies of the devilish beings to ashes, leaving behind only a series of storage treasures. In contrast with the storage bracelets of the spirit realm, it seemed that storage belts were much more popular among the elder devil race. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to draw all of these belts into his grasp, then casually swept his spiritual sense through them, upon which his brows furrowed slightly. The storage belts of these devilish beings contained very few items. Aside from some shimmering black crystals, most of the remaining items were comprised of things like formation plates and formation flags. As for those black crystals, they were most likely the devilish crystals that could only be found in the Elder Devil realm. These stones were similar to the spirit stones of the spirit realm, except they contained devilish chi instead. Spiritual light flashed from Han Li's hand as he stowed all of the storage belts away, then made his way out of the hall. He had already inspected the entire surrounding area with his spiritual sense, so he knew that there was no one else around aside from the devilish beings he had just slain. Fairy silver light naturally followed along behind him. After emerging from the hall, they discovered that this teleportation formation was situated in an underground cave. Aside from a winding natural path that led upward, there were no other exits. Han Li found it truly remarkable that the Elder Devil race had managed to find such a secluded place. Moments later, two streaks of light, one azure and one white, flew out from under a small mountain, then took a moment to decide on a direction to travel toward before flying away. After flying for less than 100 kilometers, the azure streak of light abruptly flashed a few times before gradually becoming transparent and virtually invisible. As for the accompanying streak of white light, it transformed into a nondescript white cloud amid a dull thump, and it seemed to be drifting quite slowly through the air, but it was actually no slower than the other streak of light. Thus the two of them continued onward and quickly vanished into the distance. No more than half a day after Han Li's duo had left the teleportation formation, a cloud that was formed from devilish chi suddenly came sweeping toward the underground cave from the distance. It was moving incredibly quickly, and arrived at the mountain that Han Li's duo had just flown out from in the blink of an eye. After that, the devilish chi condensed into a white-armored elderly man. This man had a short horn on his head, and bore a strong resemblance to the deity transformation stage devilish being that Han Li had slain not long ago. He was a body integration stage, high-grade devilish being, and as soon as he appeared, he flew into the underground cave with an urgent look on his face. After just the span of a few breaths, a roar of grief and pain erupted from underground. The elderly man then re-emerged on the summit of the mountain amid a flash of white light, and quickly inspected his surroundings, with thunderous fury burning within his eyes. "How dare you kill my grandson? I'll hunt you down and tear you into pieces even if I have to chase you to the end of this realm." The white-armored elderly man was then instantly able to determine the direction that Han Li's duo had departed toward, and he let loose a low roar as a black cloud of devilish chi erupted from his body again. "Oh my Buddha, Han Li killed a small fry that's related to someone powerful. What an unexpected twist that's never happened in the story before, LOL." The elderly man then laid a hand onto his belt, and a ball of black light flew out amid a clear cry. Immediately thereafter, the ball of black light transformed into a giant black crane that was around 100 feet in length, and the elderly man leaped onto the crane's back before making a hand seal with a furious expression. Black light swirled around the giant crane's wings, and it suddenly manifested 4 pairs of black wings before flapping them in unison. The giant black crane shot forth through the air like a giant arrow, and at the same time, the devilish chi released by the elderly man expanded drastically to encompass the crane as well, and its speed was instantly doubled. Right at this moment, a gargantuan black staff suddenly extended out of the cloud of black chi, before slamming viciously into the small mountain from over 10,000 feet away. An earth-shattering boom rang out as countless shards of rocks flew in all directions, and the giant staff projection vanished in a flash, having reduced the small mountain to half its original height. Meanwhile, the giant crane had already disappeared into the distance. 4 hours later, on a giant mountain that was hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, there were 2 other high-grade devilish beings discussing something with one another. "Old man Li has been gone for a long time. Didn't he say he was coming back right after he delivered a couple of protective treasures to his grandson? What's taking him so long? If he delays what we're doing here, we'll have to answer to sacred ancestor Zhu Guang." A high-grade devilish being with blue devilish marks all over his face said in an impatient manner. "There's no need to be so impatient, Lord Lan. Old man Li is not a man who doesn't know his priorities, and he's most likely already on the way back. That grandson of his is his only direct lineal descendant, so it's only normal that he's giving him a lot of attention," the other high-grade devilish being with several fleshy feelers around his mouth said in a nonchalant manner.